The Accidental Bride, a romantic fantasy audiobook written and narrated by Thora Ravencroft. Copyright 2025. All rights reserved. The synopsis can be found in the video description. Chapter 1. The music was pulsing through my bones as I sat on the edge of the abandoned building's roof, my legs dangling precariously over the edge. The city lights below twinkled like fallen stars, matching the ones above. I should have been enjoying myself. It was supposed to be a celebration of finishing our midterms, after all. Celestia, darling, you really shouldn't sit so close to the edge. Although I must say, the wind does wonderful things to your hair. I gritted my teeth at the sound of Lyrian's voice. He'd been hovering around me all evening, and quite frankly, I was getting tired of his backhanded compliments. The view is better from here, I replied without turning around, and the company is significantly more pleasant. Oh, come now, you wound me deeply. He settled beside me, much closer than I would have preferred. You know, most girls would kill to have my attention. Then perhaps you should go find one of them instead. The bonfire crackled behind us, and I could hear my friends laughing. Among them was Lysandra's distinct, high-pitched giggle, the kind that made you want to cover your ears. She was probably hanging all over Phalar again, my best friend who seemed completely oblivious to her obvious advances. Your music tonight was interesting, Lyrian continued, examining his perfectly manicured nails. The melody was quite unique, almost primitive, I'd say, but in a charming way. Primitive? I turned to face him finally, my anger getting the better of me. I wrote that piece myself, and it shows. But don't worry, with proper guidance, you could develop a more refined style. I stood up abruptly, dusting off my jeans. You know what, Lyrian? You can take your refined style and shove it. Celestia! Lysandra's voice cut through our conversation like a knife. Could you help me with something? Just over here, by the edge? I hesitated. Lysandra had never asked for my help before. In fact, she usually went out of her way to avoid speaking to me directly. But maybe she was finally trying to be civil? What do you need? I asked, approaching her cautiously. She stood near the corner of the roof, where the protective railing had long since rusted away. Oh, I just wanted to show you something fascinating. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. You see that strange light in the sky? I stepped closer, peering into the darkness. I don't see any. The push came so suddenly I didn't even have time to scream. One moment I was standing on solid ground, the next I was falling through the cold night air. The world spun around me in a blur of lights and shadows. This was it. This was how I was going to die, pushed off a building by my rival while my friends partied obliviously above. I closed my eyes, waiting for the impact. But instead of hitting concrete, I felt myself being pulled sideways, as if caught in an invisible current. The air around me shimmered with an otherworldly light, and suddenly I was falling through something that felt like thick jelly. When I opened my eyes again, I was no longer falling past familiar city buildings. Instead, I was plummeting through a star-filled sky I didn't recognize, with 2 moons hanging impossibly large above me. That's when I finally found my voice and screamed. The wind whistled past my ears as I plummeted through this alien sky. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. The ground was rushing up to meet me at an alarming speed, and I could make out what looked like a dense forest below. Oh God, oh God, oh God. I flailed my arms uselessly, trying to grab onto something, anything. The 2 moons cast an eerie purple glow over everything, making the forest look like something out of a fever dream. Through my panic, a hysterical thought crossed my mind. At least the view was spectacular. Just when I thought I was about to become a very messy decoration on the forest floor, something strange happened. The air around me began to thicken, becoming almost gelatinous. My descent slowed dramatically, and I found myself suspended in what felt like invisible jelly. Well, this is certainly not something you see every day. The voice came from somewhere above me. I twisted around in the viscous air to see a figure floating nearby, surrounded by a soft golden glow. It was Lyrian, but not quite the Lyrian I knew. His usual designer clothes had been replaced by an absurdly extravagant yellow tunic, and his perfectly styled hair was now flowing dramatically in the magical wind. You! I tried to point an accusatory finger at him, but the thick air made my movements sluggish. What is going on? Where am I? Now, let's not get hostile. He waved his hand dismissively, and I felt the gelatinous air begin to lower me slowly toward the ground, though I must say your entrance was quite spectacular. A bit dramatic for my taste, but spectacular nonetheless. Dramatic? Your friend just tried to kill me. Lysandra? Oh, darling, she's hardly my friend. More of an annoying acquaintance, really, though I must admit I didn't expect her to actually push you. She's usually more subtle with her attempts at murder. Before I could respond, another voice cut through the night air. Lyrian, stop showing off and get her down already. The barrier spell won't hold much longer. I looked down to see another figure standing in a moonlit clearing. He was tall and lean, with dark hair that seemed to absorb the moonlight rather than reflect it. Unlike Lyrian's flashy attire, he wore simple black robes that rippled like smoke in the wind. Always so serious, Rael, Lyrian called down, but he made a complex gesture with his hands, and I felt myself descending faster. When my feet finally touched the ground, I immediately collapsed onto my hands and knees, my legs shaking too much to support me. The grass beneath my palms felt different, more alive somehow, as if it was humming with energy. She's covered in transfer residue, Rael observed, keeping his distance. The portal must have been unstable. I looked down at myself and noticed for the first time that I was covered in some kind of iridescent foam. It sparkled in the moonlight and smelled faintly of ozone. What portal? What transfer residue? Will someone please tell me what's going on? My voice was getting higher with each question. And why are there 2 moons in the sky? Welcome to Etheria, Lyrian said with a theatrical bow. Where magic is real, the impossible is probable, and fashion sense is, regrettably, optional. He shot a pointed look at Rael's plain robes. Magic isn't real, I stated firmly, trying to ground myself in logic. This is just a hallucination. Maybe I hit my head when Lysandra pushed me. Maybe I'm in a coma in some hospital and this is all just... A ball of blue fire suddenly appeared in Rael's palm, illuminating his sharp features. Magic seems quite real to me. I stared at the flames, mesmerized. They danced and swirled in patterns that shouldn't have been possible, casting shadows that moved independently of the fire itself. This can't be happening, I whispered, but even as I said it, I knew it was real. The tingling energy in the air, the impossible moons above, the way my skin buzzed with something that felt ancient and powerful, it was all too vivid to be a dream. Oh, but it is happening, Lyrian said, his voice taking on an edge of excitement. And the real question is, what are we going to do with you now? Do with me? I scrambled to my feet, the strange foam still clinging to my clothes. I don't need you to do anything with me. Just send me back home. Rael extinguished the blue flame in his palm with a quick gesture. It's not that simple. The portal you fell through was unstable. Opening another one could be dangerous. Dangerous how? Oh, you know. Lyrian waved his hand dismissively. Reality-splitting, dimensional collapse, turning inside out, the usual portal mishaps. I felt my stomach lurch. Inside out? He's exaggerating. Rael shot Lyrian an annoyed look. But we can't send you back right now. The magical currents are too volatile. A distant howl echoed through the forest, making me jump. It sounded nothing like any wolf I'd ever heard, more like metal scraping against metal. That would be the night patrol, Lyrian said, suddenly looking concerned. We should move. They're not particularly fond of unexpected visitors. Or unauthorized portals, Rael added, already moving deeper into the forest, especially ones that dump foam-covered humans into our realm. I stood my ground, crossing my arms. I'm not going anywhere until someone explains what's really going on. Why are you here, Lyrian? How did you get here before me? And why are you dressed like a rejected character from a Renaissance fair? Darling, I'm wounded. This is haute couture in Etheria. Lyrian adjusted his ridiculous yellow tunic. As for how I got here, I've always been here. The Lyrian you knew was merely a projection sent to observe your world. Another howl, closer this time. The trees around us seemed to shiver. We don't have time for this, Rael growled. He raised his hands, and suddenly the shadows around us began to move, stretching and twisting into impossible shapes. What are you doing? I backed away, but the shadows followed, wrapping around my ankles like cold silk. "Saving your life," he replied. "The patrol uses tracking hounds that can smell transfer residue from leagues away. Unless you'd like to spend the next few months in an Etherean prison being questioned about illegal portal usage, I suggest you let me hide you." The shadows crept higher, and I felt an odd tingling sensation where they touched my skin. "It's cold." "Of course it's cold," Lyrian chuckled. "They're shadows. Did you expect them to be warm and cozy?" The howls were so close now I could hear heavy footfalls accompanying them. Through the trees, I caught glimpses of torchlight. "Hold still," Rael commanded, his hands weaving complex patterns in the air. "And whatever you do, don't sneeze." "Don't sneeze? Why would I?" The shadows suddenly surged up, completely enveloping me in darkness. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I could still see everything around me, but it was like looking through dark water. Just then, 3 enormous creatures burst into the clearing. They looked like wolves, but their fur was metallic, gleaming in the moonlight like polished steel. Riding on their backs were figures in armor that seemed to be made of living crystal. "Lord Lyrian," one of the riders inclined their head. "Lord Rael. What brings you to the outer forests at this hour?" "Ah, Captain Thalia." Lyrian's voice was perfectly casual. "Just enjoying some late-night spell practice. The moonlight does wonderful things for illusion magic, don't you think?" The captain's crystalline helmet tilted slightly. "We detected an unauthorized portal activation in this area. Did you?" Lyrian examined his nails. "How fascinating. Perhaps it was one of those pesky wild portals. They've been quite active lately." I held my breath as one of the metallic wolves approached my hiding spot, its nose twitching. Could it smell me through Rael's shadow magic? The metallic wolf's breath created small clouds of steam in the cool night air as it sniffed around my shadow-cloaked form. My heart was pounding so hard I was certain everyone could hear it. "A wild portal, you say?" Captain Thalia dismounted, her crystalline armor catching the moonlight in mesmerizing patterns. Strange that it would appear so close to the Institute's grounds. "The magical currents have been rather unpredictable lately," Rael commented, his voice perfectly neutral. "Perhaps the proximity to the Institute's wards is causing interference." The wolf was now inches from my face. I could see my distorted reflection in its metallic fur. A dark, shapeless mass that barely looked human. A drop of the transfer residue foam slid down my arm, threatening to fall. "And what if the residue traces our hounds are detecting?" Thalia pressed, her crystal helmet turning toward Lyrian. "Surely you don't expect me to believe that's from a wild portal as well?" "Oh, that!" Lyrian laughed airily. "Just a failed experiment of mine. You know how particular shadow magic can be, always leaving traces of itself everywhere. Rather messy business, really." The foam drop trembled, caught in the gentle night breeze. "Don't fall, don't fall, don't fall." It fell. The droplet hit the ground with a tiny clip that seemed to echo through the clearing. The metallic wolf's ears immediately swiveled forward, its mechanical eyes focusing on the spot where the foam had landed. "What was that?" Thalia's hand moved to the crystal sword at her hip. "Probably just condensation from the trees," Rael said quickly. "The nights have been unusually humid lately." The wolf wasn't convinced. It began pawing at the ground where the foam had fallen, its metal claws leaving deep gouges in the earth. I tried to step backward, but my foot caught on a root. The shadows around me rippled slightly. "There's something here," Thalia declared, drawing her sword. The blade hummed with an otherworldly energy that made my teeth ache. "Show yourself." "Captain," Lyrian stepped forward, his voice taking on an authoritative tone I'd never heard before. "Are you suggesting that 2 members of the High Council would be harboring an illegal portal jumper?" Thalia hesitated. "No, my lord, but protocol demands." "Protocol?" Lyrian's laugh was sharp and cold. "Need I remind you who wrote those protocols? Now, unless you wish to spend the rest of your career patrolling the bog of eternal stench, I suggest you and your hounds continue your rounds elsewhere." The captain's crystalline armor clinked as she stiffened. For a moment, I thought she might challenge him, but then she bowed stiffly. "As you wish, Lord Lyrian. But this incident will be noted in my report. Note away, my dear, Lyrian waved dismissively. I'm sure it will make for fascinating reading. The patrol mounted their metallic wolves and disappeared into the forest, leaving us alone in the moonlit clearing. As soon as they were gone, Rael released his shadow spell and I collapsed to my knees, gasping. That, I panted, was terrifying. Welcome to Etheria, Lyrian grinned, where even the local law enforcement rides mechanical wolves and wears living crystal. We need to move, Rael interrupted, already striding toward the deeper parts of the forest. The patrol may be gone, but they'll be back with reinforcements. And next time, even Lyrian's status won't protect us. Where are we going? I asked, scrambling to follow them. The only place in Etheria where a portal jumper might actually be welcome, Lyrian replied with a mischievous glint in his eye. The Etheria Institute of Arcane Arts. Chapter 2. The Etheria Institute of Arcane Arts? I stumbled over a root trying to keep up with Rael's long strides. You mean there's actually a magic school? Not just a magic school, Lyrian corrected, ducking under a low-hanging branch. The magic school. Only the most talented practitioners are allowed within its walls. Well, and the occasional dimensional refugee, apparently. The forest around us was getting darker, the trees pressing in closer. Strange lights flickered between the branches, not fireflies, but something more ethereal, like tiny stars that had fallen from the sky. I don't understand. If it's so exclusive, why would they help me? Because, Rael spoke without turning around, you're covered in residual portal magic. That makes you either very valuable or very dangerous. Possibly both. A distant explosion lit up the night sky, followed by what sounded like maniacal laughter. I jumped, but neither of my companions seemed concerned. Oh, that's just Professor Grimshaw's evening experiments, Lyrian waved dismissively. He's been trying to create self-propelling fireworks. Last week, he accidentally turned half his laboratory staff into peacocks. Quite an improvement, if you ask me. We emerged from the forest onto a winding path that led up a steep hill, and there, silhouetted against the twin moons, stood the most impossible building I'd ever seen. The institute seemed to be built from light itself. Towers of crystalline glass spiraled impossibly high into the sky, connected by bridges that appeared and disappeared at random. Parts of the structure floated completely unsupported, while others seemed to fold in on themselves in ways that made my eyes hurt. It's moving, I whispered, watching as one of the towers slowly rotated, changing color from deep purple to brilliant gold. The Institute adapts to the magical currents, Rael explained. It's constantly shifting and evolving, makes finding your classes interesting. Interesting isn't the word I'd use, Lyrian sniffed. Last week, my advanced illusion classroom ended up in the basement. The basement. Do you know what that does to silk robes? A high-pitched screech interrupted our conversation. Something large and furry burst from the bushes beside the path, barreling straight toward us. It looked like a bear, if bears were the size of small cars and had glowing red eyes. Oh, wonderful, Lyrian sighed. Someone let Professor Mortimer's experimental subjects loose again. The creature charged, and I did the only sensible thing. I swung my backpack at it with all my might. The backpack connected with the creature's snout with a satisfying thwack. It reared back, more startled than hurt, and I got my first good look at it. Despite its massive size and glowing eyes, there was something almost cuddly about it. Did you just hit Professor Mortimer's prize specimen with a backpack? Lyrian asked, sounding both horrified and impressed. The creature shook its head, looking more confused than angry now. It made a sound that was somewhere between a growl and a purr. Nobody told me it was a professor's pet. I clutched my backpack defensively. I thought it was going to eat us. Eat us? Rael actually laughed, a short, sharp sound that seemed to surprise even him. That's Bartholomew. He's herbivorous. Those teeth are for crushing particularly stubborn vegetables. Bartholomew sat back on his haunches and began grooming himself, completely ignoring us now. His fur sparkled with tiny points of light like a starry night sky. Well, how was I supposed to know that? Everything here is trying to kill me or arrest me. Not everything, Lyrian corrected. Just most things. And speaking of things trying to arrest us, he pointed toward the path we'd just come from. where torchlight was beginning to flicker between the trees. "The patrol." Rael's voice was tight. "They're tracking us." "But you said Bartholomew was harmless," I protested as we started running again. "Oh, he is," Lyrian called over his shoulder, "but the tracking spell he's wearing isn't. Professor Mortimer uses it to keep tabs on his experiments. And now the patrol knows exactly where we are." We sprinted up the winding path toward the Institute, its ever-shifting towers looming closer. The sound of metallic howls echoed behind us, accompanied by the crystalline clink of armor. "Almost there," Rael muttered. "Just need to reach the ward line." "The what?" I gasped, out of breath. "The magical boundary that protects the Institute," Lyrian explained. "Once we cross it, the patrol can't follow without explicit permission from the Council." "And you're on the Council," I remembered. "So we'll be safe?" "About that." Lyrian had the decency to look sheepish. "I may have slightly exaggerated my position earlier. I'm more a junior associate council member, in training. Sort of." "What?" "Less talking, more running," Rael ordered. We were nearly at the top of the hill now, and I could see something shimmering in the air ahead, like heat waves rising from hot pavement. The patrol was getting closer. I could hear Captain Thalia shouting orders, her voice carrying clearly through the night air. "Surround them. Don't let them reach the ward line. The ward line is right there." Lyrian pointed to the shimmering barrier. "Just a few more steps." A crystal arrow whistled past my ear, embedding itself in a nearby tree. Where it struck, the bark began to crystallize, spreading like frozen lightning. "Stop!" Captain Thalia's voice rang out. "By order of the Night Patrol." "Oh, now they're just being dramatic," Lyrian panted. "Next thing you know, they'll be reciting the entire code of conduct." Another arrow flew by, closer this time. The air crackled with energy, making my hair stand on end. We were almost at the barrier, but the patrol was closing in fast. When we reached the ward line, Rael called out, "Jump through it. Don't stop. Don't hesitate." "What happens if I hesitate?" "Best not to find out." Lyrian winced. "Last person who tried got turned inside out, though only temporarily. The patrol's metallic wolves were gaining on us, their mechanical paws leaving scorched prints in the grass. I could hear their gears whirring, smell the strange metallic odor of their breath. "Now!" Rael shouted. We leaped through the barrier together. For a split second, it felt like being dunked in ice water while being tickled with feathers. Then we were through, tumbling onto the manicured lawn of the Institute grounds. Behind us, the patrol skidded to a halt at the ward line. Captain Thalia dismounted, her crystal armor gleaming menacingly. "This isn't over," she called out. "The Council will hear about this breach of protocol." "Yes, yes," Lyrian waved dismissively from his sprawled position on the grass. "Add it to your report. I'm sure it will make fascinating reading, along with your detailed account of how 3 people managed to outrun your entire patrol." The captain's helmet tilted dangerously. "You're playing a dangerous game, Lyrian. The laws exist for a reason. The laws," Rael stood up, brushing grass from his robes, "also state that any being seeking asylum at the Institute must be granted a hearing before the Council. Or have those protocols changed since I last checked?" Captain Thalia's posture stiffened. Without another word, she mounted her mechanical wolf and signaled her patrol to retreat. "That," I said, still lying on my back and staring at the twin moons, "was absolutely insane. Welcome to your first day at the Institute." Lyrian grinned. "Just wait until you see what we have planned for orientation." "Orientation?" I struggled to my feet, still dizzy from our mad dash through the ward line. "I'm not staying here. I need to get home." "Ah, about that?" Lyrian exchanged a glance with Rael. "Remember what I said about unstable portals?" Before he could continue, the ground beneath our feet began to vibrate. A section of the Institute's wall rippled like water, and suddenly a massive door materialized. It was made of what looked like liquid moonlight, with symbols that crawled across its surface like living things. "The council chambers," Rael said quietly. "They're summoning us." "Now? But I'm covered in portal foam and grass stains." "Trust me." Lyrian straightened his yellow tunic. "They've seen worse." Last week, Professor Grimshaw's peacocks staged a revolt during a full council session. Feathers everywhere. Most undignified. The door swung open silently, revealing a corridor that seemed to be made of starlight. At the far end, I could see another set of doors, these ones crafted from what appeared to be living shadows. Remember, Rael turned to me, his expression serious. Speak only when spoken to. Don't mention the patrol chase. And whatever you do, don't sneeze. Again with the sneezing. Why is everyone so obsessed with shh? Lyrian pressed a finger to my lips. The council can hear everything within these walls. Even thoughts sometimes, especially the loud ones. I swatted his hand away. Get your finger off my face before I bite it. Ooh, feisty. I do love it when they have spirit. Makes the council meetings so much more entertaining. Both of you quiet, Rael hissed. They're waiting. We walked down the starlit corridor, our footsteps making no sound on the ethereal floor. The shadows at the edges seemed to watch us pass, whispering in voices just below the threshold of hearing. As we approached the final doors, I heard something that made my blood freeze. Lysandra's distinctive laugh, echoing from somewhere beyond the shadow doors. No, I whispered. It can't be. The doors swung open, revealing a circular chamber that seemed to exist in the space between stars. And there, seated among the council members, was Lysandra, but not the Lysandra I knew. This version of her wore robes that seemed to be woven from pure darkness, and her eyes glowed with an inner light that was anything but human. Welcome, portal jumper, she smiled, showing teeth that were just a bit too sharp to be natural. We've been expecting you. Chapter 3. The council chamber was unlike anything I'd ever seen. The walls seemed to be made of living constellations, with stars that moved and shifted like curious eyes. 13 thrones floated at different heights around the circular room, each one crafted from materials that defied physics. One appeared to be made of solid lightning, another of frozen time itself. And there sat Lysandra, perched on a throne of writhing shadows, looking down at me with those unnaturally bright eyes. The sight of her made my blood boil. You tried to kill me, I shouted, forgetting Rael's warning about speaking only when spoken to. Kill you? Lysandra's laugh echoed through the chamber, making the starlight ripple. My dear Celestia, I merely expedited your arrival. We've been waiting quite some time for someone with your particular resonance. Resonance? I looked at Lyrian and Rael, but they had both dropped into deep bows, their foreheads nearly touching the floor that wasn't quite a floor. Yes, another council member spoke. An elderly woman whose throne seemed to be carved from pure moonlight. You see, not everyone can survive a portal crossing. Most humans simply dissolve. But you not only survived, but you brought something with you, something quite interesting. I glanced down at my clothes, still covered in the strange, iridescent foam. You mean this stuff? Not the residue. Lysandra leaned forward, her shadow robes rippling like dark water. The music, the song that lives in your blood. We've been watching you for some time, Celestia. Your melodies have power that could be very useful to us. Is that why you sent Lyrian to spy on me? I demanded, shooting him a glare. He had the decency to look slightly ashamed. Among other reasons. A deep voice rumbled from a throne made of what appeared to be crystallized thunder. The barrier between our worlds is weakening. We need new sources of power to maintain it. Your music could be the key, and if I refused to help, the chamber grew suddenly cold. The stars in the walls dimmed, and shadows began to creep across the floor. That would be unfortunate, Lysandra smiled, showing those two sharp teeth again. But before we discuss such unpleasantries, perhaps you'd like to see your quarters. After all, you'll be staying with us for quite some time. I don't want quarters. I want to go home. The portal that brought you here was unstable, the Moonlight Woman explained. Opening another could tear reality apart. Until we find a safe way to send you back, you'll need to adapt to life here at the Institute. And if you're worried about accommodations, Lyrian finally spoke up, still bowing, I can assure you they're quite luxurious. Well, except for the ghost problem. But really, who doesn't enjoy a little supernatural company now and then? Ghost problem? I squeaked. Oh yes, Lysandra's smile widened. I believe we have the perfect room for you. It's in the East Tower, the one that used to belong to Professor Theron before his. Unfortunate accident. Accident? My voice was getting higher with each question. His students may have accidentally turned him inside out, Lyrian whispered. Permanently. He's quite sensitive about it, so try not to stare at his translucent organs. The council members began to fade away one by one, their thrones dissolving into stardust. Only Lysandra remained, her glowing eyes fixed on me. "Welcome to your new home, Celestia," she said, her voice echoing long after she had disappeared. "Do try to stay in one piece, unlike poor Professor Theron." The Institute's corridors were a maze of shifting architecture and impossible geometry. Every time I thought I'd memorized a path, the walls would rearrange themselves, leaving me completely lost. The worst part? My escort seemed to find my confusion highly amusing. "Left here," Lyrian called out cheerfully as we approached what appeared to be a solid wall. Or was it right? The East Tower does tend to wander a bit on Tuesdays. Or is it Wednesday? Time gets a bit fuzzy around here. "It's actually straight ahead," Rael corrected, pointing to what looked like empty air. "The wall is just an illusion." "You expect me to walk through a wall?" I stared at them both like they'd lost their minds. "Well, you could try walking around it, but then you'd end up in last Thursday, and trust me, nobody wants to relive last Thursday." Lyrian shuddered dramatically. The peacock incident was bad enough the first time. Taking a deep breath, I stepped forward and straight through the illusory wall. The sensation was like walking through a soap bubble. On the other side, I found myself in a circular room that seemed to be made entirely of moonlight. "Welcome to your new home." Lyrian spread his arms theatrically. "The East Tower's finest accommodation, complete with its own resident ghost. Speaking of which, Professor Theron, are you lurking about?" A chill ran down my spine as a translucent figure materialized through one of the walls. He was tall and thin, wearing what might have been impressive academic robes if they weren't partially inside out, showing glimpses of spectral organs. "I do not lurk," the ghost sniffed indignantly. "I observe. There's a difference." His eyes, or what was left of them, fixed on me. "So, this is the portal jumper everyone's been talking about? Bit scrawny, isn't she?" "I am not scrawny," I protested. "And what do you mean everyone's been talking about me?" "Oh, news travels fast in the Institute." Theron drifted closer, his translucent form casting strange shadows in the moonlit room, especially when it involves unauthorized portals, chase scenes with the night patrol, and a rather impressive display of backpack-based self-defense. "You saw that?" "My dear girl, I see everything that happens in this tower. Being dead has its advantages. For instance, I know that Lyrian here has been practicing his dramatic entrance poses in the mirror every morning." Lyrian's face turned an interesting shade of pink. "I do not." "Oh, please." Theron rolled his spectral eyes. "Yesterday you spent 3 hours perfecting your cape swish." 3 hours, I counted. "It's important to maintain a certain aesthetic," Lyrian muttered defensively. "Well," Rael cleared his throat, "we should let you get settled in. The council will want to see you again tomorrow to discuss your situation." "My situation?" I looked around the moonlit room. "You mean being trapped in a magical school with a sarcastic ghost and a fashion-obsessed elf?" "Among other things." Theron floated closer, his form flickering like a candle flame. "Like the fact that you're carrying enough residual portal magic to tear a hole in reality. Or the curious way the Institute's wards seem to respond to your presence. Most interesting." As if on cue, the walls of the room shimmered, the moonlight taking on a distinctly musical quality. It was responding to my emotions, I realized with a start. The more anxious I felt, the more the light seemed to pulse and swirl. "Fascinating," Theron murmured. "Perhaps we should conduct some experiments." "No experiments," Lyrian and Rael said in unison. "The last time you experimented on a student, they ended up speaking in reverse for a month," Lyrian added. "That was an improvement." Theron sniffed. "Have you heard how students speak these days? At least backwards Latin has some dignity to it." "So," I said, trying to sound casual as I sat on the edge of my new bed, "what exactly happened to make your students turn you inside out?" Theron's translucent form flickered like a bad television signal. "That, my dear, is a rather sensitive topic." Though I will say it involved a mispronounced incantation, 3 unauthorized transformation spells, and a particularly aggressive rubber duck. A rubber duck? Don't ask, Lyrian shuddered. The squeaking still haunts my nightmares. Speaking of haunting, Rael interjected, we should discuss the rules of your stay here. Rules? I raised an eyebrow. I thought I was basically a prisoner. Guest, Lyrian corrected quickly. A temporarily displaced interdimensional guest who just happens to be unable to leave due to potentially reality-shattering consequences. That's the definition of a prisoner. Such a pessimist, Theron floated upside down, his spectral organs shifting uncomfortably. Think of it as an extended vacation in a magical realm where physics is more of a polite suggestion than an actual law. The rules, Rael continued, ignoring our banter, are simple. First, no unauthorized magic use. Second, stay within the Institute's grounds. Third, avoid the kitchen between midnight and 3 a.m. That's when the Enchanted Cookware holds their Fight Club meetings. Fight Club? The Waffle Iron is undefeated champion, Lyrian nodded solemnly, though the cheese grater has been training hard for a rematch. I rubbed my temples, feeling a headache coming on. This is insane, all of it. I just want to go home. Home? Theron drifted closer, his form casting strange shadows on the moonlit walls. My dear girl, you've been chosen by the Institute itself. The walls sing when you walk past. The very fabric of this place responds to your presence. Do you really think that's a coincidence? As if to prove his point, the room's light pulsed in harmony with my heartbeat, creating patterns that looked suspiciously like musical notes. That's normal, right? I asked, watching as the walls continued their luminous dance. About as normal as Lyrian's fashion sense, Theron smirked. I'll have you know that yellow is very in this season. Lyrian protested. Yes, if you're a diseased canary, Rael muttered under his breath. Before Lyrian could defend his sartorial choices further, a bell tolled somewhere in the depths of the Institute. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Ah, dinner time, Theron announced. I'd join you, but being incorporeal does put a damper on the whole eating thing. Though I do enjoy watching the first years try to navigate the moving tables. Moving tables? Oh, yes, Lyrian grinned. They're quite particular about their dinner companions. Last week, one table spent the entire meal chasing a student who tried to eat dessert before finishing their vegetables. I looked at Rael, hoping for some sign that they were joking. His completely serious expression did nothing to reassure me. Welcome to your new life, Theron said cheerfully, beginning to fade away. Do try to keep all your organs on the inside. Trust me, it's much more comfortable that way. The Great Hall of the Etheria Institute was exactly what you'd expect from a magical dining room, which is to say, completely chaotic. Tables floated at different heights, some upside down, others spinning lazily in midair. Students sat wherever they pleased, their plates defying gravity as food occasionally decided to dance across the room. Remember, Lyrian whispered as we entered, don't make eye contact with the soup. It gets very clingy. The soup gets clingy? I watched in horror as a bowl of what looked like tomato bisque chased a first-year student around the room, leaving a trail of red droplets floating in the air. Oh, yes. Rael nodded solemnly. Last week, the clam chowder proposed marriage to Professor Grimshaw. It was quite the scandal. Before I could process that particular piece of information, one of the floating tables drifted toward us. It bumped gently against my hip, like an affectionate cat seeking attention. Well, would you look at that? Lyrian grinned. Table 13 likes you. It's usually quite picky about its dinner companions. I am not sitting at a table that has feelings, I declared firmly. The table drooped slightly, its wooden surface somehow managing to look dejected. Now you've hurt its feelings, Lyrian scolded. Apologize to the nice table. I am not apologizing to furniture. The table began to tremble, and suddenly all the other floating tables turned to face us. The great hall went eerily quiet. Oh dear, Rael muttered. Table solidarity. This could get messy. Fine. I threw up my hands in defeat. I'm sorry, Table 13. You seem like a lovely piece of furniture, and I would be honored to dine with you." The table perked up immediately, its surface gleaming with what could only be described as smug satisfaction. The other tables returned to their previous activities, crisis apparently averted. "Well handled," came Theron's ghostly voice as he materialized through the ceiling. "Though you might want to watch out for the chairs. They can be rather jealous of new favorites." Sure enough, as I approached table 13, several chairs began jockeying for position, each trying to present itself as the most comfortable seating option. "This is ridiculous," I muttered, finally choosing a plush armchair that looked less likely to try and cuddle me. In my world, furniture knows its place. How dreadfully boring, Theron yawned, floating through several students who shivered at his passing. "Next you'll tell me your books don't try to eat each other." I paused with my fork halfway to my mouth. "The books do what now?" "Oh, yes," Lyrian said cheerfully, taking a seat across from me. "The library's quite the battlefield. The advanced spellbooks are particularly aggressive during mating season." "Mating season?" "Indeed," Theron nodded. "Why, just last week, Advanced Transmutation Volume 3 tried to elope with Beginner's Guide to Potion Making. Quite the scandal. The advanced texts are usually such snobs about breeding." I looked down at my plate, which had helpfully filled itself with what appeared to be some sort of glowing pasta. "Is the food at least normal?" "Define normal," Rael said, watching as his salad rearranged itself into a perfect replica of the Institute's architecture. "I'm beginning to think that word doesn't exist here," I sighed, cautiously taking a bite of the luminescent pasta. It tasted like sunshine and distant laughter, with a hint of tomorrow's weather. Chapter 4. The Institute's kitchens were a forbidden territory after midnight for a very good reason. As I crept through the darkened corridors, guided by Theron's ghostly form, I could hear the distinct sound of metal clashing against metal. "Are you sure this is a good idea?" I whispered, ducking as a spatula went flying overhead. "Define good," Theron smirked, his translucent form casting eerie shadows on the walls. "If you mean safe and sensible, then absolutely not. If you mean entertaining for a bored ghost, then it's brilliant." The kitchen doors were slightly ajar, revealing flashes of what appeared to be an all-out war between various cooking implements. A waffle iron performed an impressive roundhouse kick, sending a whisk spinning into the darkness. "I'm starving," I groaned. "There has to be something edible that isn't trying to kill other kitchen utensils." "Well," Theron stroked his spectral chin thoughtfully, "there is Kael's special sausage. He keeps it in a locked cabinet near the back. Very protective of it, that one. Something about it being a family heirloom." "A sausage is a family heirloom?" "Werewolves," Theron shrugged. "They have peculiar attachments to their meat products." "Wait, werewolves?" I hissed. "There are werewolves here?" "Oh, yes. Kael's quite the specimen. Top of his class in advanced transformation studies, though he does have an unfortunate tendency to shed during exam week." I was about to protest further when my stomach growled loudly enough to momentarily pause the kitchen utensil fight club. Several pieces of silverware turned to look in our direction. "Quick," Theron whispered, while they're distracted. "The sausage cabinet is behind that possessed bread oven." "The what now?" As if in answer, a massive iron oven creaked open its door, releasing a cloud of flour that formed into vaguely threatening shapes. "Don't make eye contact," Theron advised. "It's still bitter about being replaced by the new self-cleaning model." Keeping close to the walls, I crept past the ongoing battle. The waffle iron had apparently declared itself champion and was now performing a victory dance atop a defeated cheese grater. The cabinet in question was ornately carved with what appeared to be scenes of wolves hunting under a full moon. A heavy padlock secured its doors. "And how exactly am I supposed to open this?" I whispered. "Oh, that's the easy part," Theron grinned. "Watch and learn." He floated through the cabinet door, and after a moment of rustling, the lock clicked open from the inside. "Being incorporeal does have its advantages," he said smugly. Inside the cabinet, hanging in solitary splendor, was the largest, most impressive sausage I'd ever seen. It gleamed in the moonlight streaming through the kitchen windows, its surface perfectly seasoned and cured. "Are you sure about this?" I asked, reaching for the sausage. If it's really a family heirloom. Consider it payback for that time Kale used my classroom as a personal scratching post, Theron sniffed. Besides, what's the worst that could happen? As I would soon learn, those were exactly the wrong words to say in a magical institute. The moment my fingers touched the sausage, several things happened at once. First, every piece of cutlery in the kitchen froze mid-battle. Second, a low, mournful howl echoed through the institute's halls. And third, the sausage began to glow with an ominous red light. "Theron," I whispered, still clutching the now luminescent meat product. "Why is it glowing?" The ghost looked slightly uncomfortable, if that's possible for a spectral being. I may have forgotten to mention that werewolf heirlooms are typically enchanted with protective spells. What kind of protective spells? As if in answer, the sausage suddenly grew warm in my hands. A series of runic symbols appeared along its length, pulsing with an inner light. "Oh dear," Theron floated closer, examining the runes. "That's not good." "What's not good?" "Well, according to these runes, you've just activated an ancient werewolf tracking spell, and..." He squinted at a particularly bright symbol, possibly agreed to a marriage contract. "I what?" The kitchen erupted into chaos. The waffle iron, sensing the impending disaster, dove for cover behind the bread oven. The silverware scattered, taking refuge in various drawers and cabinets. "How does stealing a sausage equate to agreeing to marriage?" I demanded, trying to drop the enchanted meat product. To my horror, it seemed to be stuck to my hands. Werewolf courtship rituals are rather unique, Theron explained, watching with obvious amusement as I attempted to shake off the clingy sausage. Stealing a family's prized meat is traditionally seen as a declaration of romantic intent. That's ridiculous. Who would create such a stupid tradition? The same people who think turning into giant wolves during full moons is a perfectly reasonable lifestyle choice, Theron shrugged. Look on the bright side. Kale's actually quite handsome when he's not shedding all over the furniture. Another howl echoed through the institute, closer this time. The sausage's glow intensified, and I could feel it pulling me toward the door. "He's coming," Theron announced unnecessarily, "and he's bringing friends." I can hear Lyrian's dramatic cape swishing from here. "Help me get this thing off." "Oh no," Theron grinned, beginning to fade away. "This is far too entertaining. Besides, I haven't seen a good werewolf wedding in decades. The food fights are legendary. Theron, don't you dare disappear on me." But the ghost was already gone, leaving me alone in the kitchen with an enchanted sausage and the sound of approaching footsteps. The waffle iron, in a rare show of sympathy, pointed toward a hidden service entrance behind the pantry. "Thanks," I muttered, ducking through the door just as voices reached the kitchen. "The tracking spell says she's in here somewhere," came Kyle's deep voice, followed by the sound of sniffing. "And she has my sausage." "Your sausage?" Lyrian's voice dripped with amusement. "Is that what we're calling it now? This is serious. That sausage has been in my family for generations." "Yes, because that's completely normal." Rael's dry tone joined the conversation. "Perfectly reasonable to keep ancient preserved meat as a family heirloom." As their voices grew closer, I clutched the glowing sausage to my chest and ran deeper into the darkness of the service corridor. Behind me, I could hear Kyle's frustrated growl and Lyrian's distinctive laugh. This was going to be a very long night. The service corridor twisted and turned like a snake, leading deeper into the bowels of the institute. The glowing sausage provided unwanted illumination, making stealth practically impossible. Behind me, I could hear the hunting party getting closer. "The trail leads this way," Kyle's voice echoed off the stone walls. "And is that moonflower perfume?" "Oh, brilliant," I muttered, remembering the scented lotion I'd borrowed from my roommate back home. Of course werewolves have enhanced smell. "You know," Theron materialized through a nearby wall, making me jump, "this is turning out even better than I expected. We haven't had this much excitement since the Great Cafeteria Uprising of '82. I thought you'd abandoned me." "Abandon Prime Entertainment? Never. Besides, someone needs to document this for posterity. The Great Sausage Caper has a nice ring to it, don't you think?" A crash from behind us suggested that Kyle had discovered the service entrance. The sausage's glow intensified, pulsing like a magical beacon. "They're getting closer." Theron observed cheerfully. I do hope you're prepared for werewolf courtship rituals. They typically involve moonlit hunts, ceremonial howling, and the exchange of rare meats. I am not marrying a werewolf, I hissed, ducking into an alcove as footsteps approached. This is all your fault. You said stealing the sausage would be easy. And it was. The complications afterward are what make it interesting. Oh, look, here comes the dramatic confrontation. Kyle rounded the corner, his eyes glowing amber in the darkness. He was tall, muscular, and admittedly handsome in a rugged sort of way. His dark hair was slightly disheveled, and there was something wild about his features that suggested he wasn't entirely human. There you are, he growled, but not entirely menacingly. Was that amusement in his voice? You know, there are easier ways to get my attention than stealing my family's prized possession. This isn't what it looks like. I clutched the sausage protectively. Your ghost professor tricked me into it. Slander, Theron declared, floating between us. I merely suggested an alternative dining option. You're the one who activated the courtship enchantment. Courtship enchantment? Lyrian appeared behind Kyle, his yellow tunic somehow still immaculate despite the chase. Oh, this is precious. The mysterious monster is actually a sausage thief with romantic intentions. I do not have romantic intentions, I protested. I was just hungry. Hungry for love, perhaps? Lyrian waggled his eyebrows suggestively. That's it. I thrust the glowing sausage toward Kyle. Take your enchanted meat product and leave me alone. But the sausage had other ideas. Instead of releasing my grip, it pulled me forward, directly into Kyle's chest. We collided with an undignified oof, and I found myself staring up into those amber eyes. Well, he said softly, a smile tugging at his lips, this is certainly an unconventional way to meet one's intended. I am not your intended. The ancient werewolf magic seems to disagree, Theron pointed out helpfully. And you know what they say, you can't fight tradition. This is ridiculous. I tried to push away from Kyle, but the sausage seemed determined to keep us together. I don't want to marry anyone, especially not because of an enchanted meat product. You know, Kyle said thoughtfully, still holding me close, most werewolves spend months planning the perfect meat theft to court their intended. You just went straight for the family heirloom. I have to admire the audacity. The what now? Lyrian leaned against the wall, thoroughly enjoying the spectacle. Are you telling me werewolf courtship involves organized meat theft? Of course, Kyle nodded seriously. It's a tradition dating back centuries. The more valuable and well-guarded the meat, the more impressive the courtship gesture. And you kept this particularly powerful piece of enchanted sausage just lying around in an unlocked cabinet? Rael raised an eyebrow. It wasn't unlocked, Kyle protested. Someone, he glared at Theron, helped her break in. Merely facilitating true love, Theron floated smugly above us. Besides, your grandmother has been pestering you about finding a mate. Now you have one, a uniquely qualified candidate who's already proven her prowess at meat acquisition. I am not qualified for anything. I tried again to separate myself from Kyle, but the sausage's magic held firm. This is all a huge misunderstanding. Oh, but it isn't, came a new voice, rich with authority and amusement. We all turned to see an elegant older woman standing at the end of the corridor. Her silver hair was elegantly styled, and her robe seemed to shimmer with moonlight. Grandmother, Kyle's voice was suddenly much less confident. I can explain. No need, dear. Lady Rosalind swept forward, her eyes twinkling. I've been watching this delightful chase unfold. I must say, it's been ages since I've seen such an entertaining courtship ritual. Lady Rosalind, Lyrian bowed deeply. We didn't expect you until next week's full moon celebration. And miss this? She gestured at Kyle and me, still bound together by the glowing sausage. A mysterious new student who not only manages to steal our most prized family heirloom but also activates its ancient courtship enchantment? This is better than any formal introduction could have been. But I didn't mean to, I started. Of course you didn't, dear. Lady Rosalind patted my cheek. The best matches are often unexpected. Now then, Shall we discuss wedding arrangements? I'm thinking a traditional ceremony under the full moon, with all the proper howling ceremonies. Howling ceremonies? I squeaked. Oh, yes, Theron materialized beside Lady Rosalind. And don't forget the traditional dance of the 7 meets. As Lady Rosalind began enthusiastically planning my apparently inevitable werewolf wedding, I caught Kyle's eye. To my surprise, he looked more amused than annoyed. Don't worry, he whispered, low enough that only I could hear. We'll figure this out. Though I have to admit, you're not quite what I expected in a mate. Is that a compliment or an insult? He grinned, showing just a hint of fang. Let's call it an interesting beginning. Chapter 5. It had been 3 days since the great sausage incident, as Theron had taken to calling it, and I was no closer to escaping my impending werewolf wedding. The enchanted sausage still followed me everywhere, glowing like a magical tracking device, and occasionally emitting what sounded suspiciously like wedding march music. You know, Theron materialized through my bedroom wall one morning. Most people would be thrilled to marry into one of the most powerful werewolf families in Etheria. The dental plan alone is exceptional. I don't need a dental plan, I grumbled, trying to stuff the persistent sausage into a drawer. I need a way out of this mess. Well, the ghost stroked his translucent chin thoughtfully. There is one possibility. Before he could elaborate, a commotion erupted in the corridor outside. The door burst open, revealing a disheveled elf with mismatched socks and what appeared to be scorch marks on his robes. Sorry, he yelped, diving behind my bed. Just pretend I'm not here. Ilukar, Theron sighed. What did you do this time? Nothing, the elf protested. I was just trying to perfect my transformation spell for Professor Grimshaw's class. How was I supposed to know the peacocks would be so sensitive about being turned into teapots? A furious squawking sound echoed down the hallway, followed by the distinct sound of angry birds seeking revenge. Transformation spell? I perked up, an idea forming. Could you transform me into something that would void a werewolf marriage contract? Ilukar peeked over the bed, his eyes lighting up with interest. Well, I do have this new spell I've been working on. It's supposed to transform the target into their true magical form, but the results have been a bit unpredictable. Last week, I tried it on myself and ended up with tentacles for 3 days. Perfect. I grabbed his arm, pulling him up. Do it. What? Theron and Ilukar exclaimed simultaneously. Think about it, I explained quickly. If I'm transformed into something horrifying, surely Kyle's grandmother will call off the wedding. No one wants a tentacled bride. Actually, Theron interjected, there's a fascinating precedent involving a werewolf-kraken union back in the 3rd Dynasty. Not helping, Theron. The peacock squawks were getting closer. Ilukar glanced nervously at the door, then back at me. Are you sure about this? The spell's still experimental. Less talking, more casting, I insisted. Quick, before those birds find you. Ilukar took a deep breath, raised his wand, and began chanting in a language that sounded like a mix between Latin and hiccups. The air around me began to shimmer with an odd purplish light. Oh my, Theron's eyes widened. This should be interesting. The last thing I saw before the transformation took hold was the enchanted sausage attempting to shield me from the spell. Then everything went dark, and I felt my body begin to change in ways that definitely weren't covered in any biology textbook. The transformation felt like being turned inside out and reassembled by a drunk architect. My bones shifted, my skin tingled, and something that felt suspiciously like a tail sprouted from my lower back. When the purple light finally faded, I opened my eyes to find Theron and Ilukar staring at me with identical expressions of shock. Well, Theron broke the silence. That's certainly different. Different how? My voice came out as a melodious growl, several octaves deeper than normal. Someone give me a mirror. Are you sure that's wise? Ilukar asked, backing away slowly. Sometimes ignorance is bliss. The enchanted sausage, which had been hovering anxiously nearby, suddenly produced a full-length mirror from nowhere. I looked at my reflection and promptly forgot how to breathe. I had scales. Beautiful, iridescent scales that shifted colors like an oil slick in sunlight. My eyes glowed with an inner fire, and elegant horns curved back from my temples. The tail was real, long and serpentine, with a tuft of silvery fur at the tip. Most surprisingly, a pair of translucent wings sprouted from my shoulders, their membranes catching the light like stained glass. I'm gorgeous? Theron suggested. Terrifying? Ilukar offered. Awesome. I spread my wings experimentally, knocking over several pieces of furniture. This is way better than tentacles. Yes, congratulations on becoming a dragon hybrid. Theron rolled his spectral eyes. I'm sure this will definitely convince Lady Rosalind to cancel the wedding. Werewolves are notoriously opposed to powerful, magical creatures as potential mates. Was that sarcasm? No, that was existential dread wrapped in irony and served with a side of impending doom. Lady Rosalind will be ecstatic. A dragon hybrid in the family? The gossip potential alone will keep her entertained for centuries. Before I could process this unwelcome revelation, the door burst open again. This time it was Kyle, looking windswept and worried. I smelled transformation magic, he announced, then stopped dead in his tracks when he saw me. His amber eyes widened, and for a moment he seemed at a loss for words. Surprise? I tried to smile, though I wasn't sure how that looked with my new fangs. You. Kyle stepped closer, his expression unreadable. You're a monster? I suggested glumly. Perfect, he breathed, and there was something in his voice that made my new tail curl involuntarily. Oh no, Theron groaned. He's smitten. This is exactly the opposite of what we were trying to achieve. The enchanted sausage, apparently agreeing with Kyle's assessment, began playing wedding music with renewed enthusiasm. Lady Rosalind's reaction to my new form was exactly as Theron had predicted. She burst into the room, took one look at me, and promptly burst into tears of joy. A dragon hybrid, she exclaimed, clasping her hands together. Oh, this is even better than I hoped. The first dragon-werewolf union in 7 centuries. The other families will be absolutely green with envy. But I didn't mean to. I started. And those scales, she continued, circling me with an appraising eye. Such lovely iridescence. Our grandchildren will be magnificent. Grandchildren? I squeaked, my new tail wrapping protectively around my legs. Mother, Kyle intervened, though he couldn't quite hide his amused smile. Perhaps we should give her some time to adjust to the transformation before planning the next generation? Nonsense. These things require careful planning. We'll need to modify the traditional ceremonies, of course. The dance of 7 meets will need to accommodate wings, and the moonlight hunt might be a bit unfair now that she can fly. Actually, Ilukar raised his hand timidly, the transformation spell might wear off. Might? I whirled on him, accidentally knocking over a bookshelf with my tail. You mean you don't know? Well, experimental magic is rather unpredictable. He shuffled his feet nervously. But look on the bright side. At least you didn't get tentacles. I'd rather have tentacles than be stuck in an arranged marriage. Oh, don't be dramatic, dear. Lady Rosalind patted my scaled arm. Besides, you've already accepted the courtship by stealing the enchanted sausage. Speaking of which, she eyed the still glowing meat product floating nearby. That sausage has excellent taste. It hasn't bonded with anyone in generations. The sausage preened at the compliment, its glow intensifying. This is getting out of hand, I muttered, then noticed Kyle was still staring at me with that intense expression. What? Nothing, he said quickly, then added more softly. You look like starlight made flesh. The compliment caught me off guard, making my scales shimmer with what I hoped wasn't a visible blush. Theron, floating above us, made gagging noises. Oh, wonderful, he groaned. Now they're getting poetic. Next thing you know, there'll be moonlit serenades and dramatic declarations of eternal love. There will be no serenades, I insisted, though my traitor tail had started swaying like a pleased cat. Of course not. Lady Rosalind winked. Those come after the engagement feast. Now, about the wedding colors. I'm thinking midnight blue and silver to complement your scales. The news of my transformation spread through the Institute like wildfire. By dinner time, the great hall was buzzing with speculation and rumors. The floating tables seemed particularly excited, bouncing up and down as students whispered and pointed. I heard she's part dragon, Part demon and part tax accountant, one first-year whispered. Tax accountant? His friend scoffed. Don't be ridiculous. Everyone knows dragons are terrible with paperwork. I sat at my usual table, trying to keep my wings folded and my tail from knocking over the floating candles. Cal sat beside me, occasionally shooting glances that made my scales shimmer with embarrassment. You know, he said softly, in werewolf culture, a dramatic transformation is considered incredibly romantic. It shows adaptability and strength. Everything in werewolf culture seems to be considered romantic, I grumbled. I bet you think tax forms are sexy too, only if they're filled out under a full moon. He grinned, showing those slightly pointed teeth. Before I could respond, a commotion erupted at the entrance to the great hall. Lysandra, a student I'd never met but who apparently had a grudge against monsters, stood up dramatically. I challenged the dragon hybrid to a duel, she announced, her voice echoing through the suddenly silent hall, for the honor of the Institute. Oh dear, Theron materialized between the floating dishes. This should be entertaining. Try not to set anything important on fire. I don't even know how to use these powers, I hissed. Perfect time to learn, the ghost shrugged. Besides, you can't refuse a formal challenge without losing face. It's in the Student Handbook, Section 7, Paragraph 3. All dramatic duels must be accepted, preferably with witty banter and appropriate background music. The enchanted sausage, still following me everywhere, began playing what sounded suspiciously like boss battle music. I accept, I found myself saying, standing up. But I choose the location. The courtyard at midnight, Lysandra smirked. Unless you're afraid? Afraid? I let a small flame escape between my fangs, surprising even myself. Honey, I'm part dragon now. Fear isn't really in my vocabulary anymore. The students erupted in excited whispers. Kyle touched my arm gently. Are you sure about this? He asked, concern evident in his amber eyes. Not even slightly, I admitted, but I'm tired of running and hiding. Besides, I added with a grin, how hard can it be to be a dragon? Chapter 6. The courtyard of the Etheria Institute was bathed in moonlight as students gathered for the upcoming duel. Floating lanterns cast an ethereal glow over the scene, and the enchanted sausage had taken up position as an impromptu conductor, organizing a small orchestra of animated instruments for dramatic background music. Remember, Theron floated beside me, offering last-minute advice, dragons are naturally magical creatures. Your powers should come instinctively, like breathing or making terrible life choices. That's not helpful, I growled, trying to keep my wings from twitching nervously. What if I accidentally burn down the Institute? Oh, don't worry about that. He waved a translucent hand. The building's protected by ancient wards. Though I do recommend avoiding the library, the books are quite flammable, and some of them bite back. Kyle stood nearby, his amber eyes reflecting the moonlight. You don't have to do this, he said softly. I could challenge Lysandra in your place. No, I straightened my spine, feeling my scales shimmer. I'm tired of running and hiding. Besides, I added with a fanged grin, how often does one get to duel as a dragon? That's the spirit. Theron clapped his ghostly hands. Now remember, according to the Student Handbook, all formal duels must include at least 3 dramatic declarations, 1 witty retort, and if possible, a reference to someone's mother. You're making that up. Only partially. The mother references are actually encouraged in the appendix. Lysandra arrived precisely at midnight, surrounded by her admirers. She wore dueling robes that seemed designed more for fashion than function, and her wand sparkled with decorative gems. Last chance to back out, monster, she called across the courtyard. Though I must say the scales are an improvement over your usual look. And your personality is an improvement over a rabid troll's, I replied, but only slightly. The crowd oohed appreciatively. Theron nodded approvingly. Good start. Now try something about her mother's questionable taste in hats. The duel began with a flash of light from Lysandra's wand. I ducked, my new dragon reflexes surprisingly quick, as a bolt of purple energy sizzled past my horns. Is that the best you can do? I taunted, channeling my inner dragon. My grandmother's knitting needles are more threatening. Your grandmother probably dates trolls, Lysandra shot back, sending another spell my way. Excellent mother-adjacent insult, Theron called from the sidelines. 2 points for creative genealogy. I spread my wings instinctively, using them to deflect a barrage of magical projectiles. The enchanted sausage, still conducting its impromptu orchestra, had the violins switched to an intense battle theme. You know, I called out, dodging another spell. For someone so obsessed with purity, your aim is remarkably impure. The crowd gasped appreciatively. Even Kyle chuckled, though he was still watching with obvious concern. At least I don't need scales to look interesting, Lysandra snarled, her next spell grazing my wing. The pain was sharp but brief. More importantly, it triggered something deep within my new dragon nature. Heat built in my chest, rising like a tide of liquid fire. Oh my, Theron's eyes widened. Everyone might want to step back. Dragon breath incoming. Dragon what now? I managed to say before my mouth filled with blue flames. The fire burst forth in a spectacular display, forming intricate patterns in the air. Lysandra shrieked and dove behind a statue, which promptly melted into an artistic puddle. That, Kyle breathed, was incredibly attractive. Focus, I snapped, though my scales definitely shimmered at the compliment. I'm trying to not burn down the school. Actually, Theron floated closer. A little property damage is traditional in magical duels. It's covered by the Institute's insurance. Section 12, paragraph 7. All dramatic battles must include at least one destroyed architectural feature. You're making that up again. Only partially. The insurance part is real. The duel intensified as Lysandra, realizing she was outmatched in raw power, switched to more cunning tactics. She conjured a swarm of glowing butterflies that exploded on contact. Is that supposed to be intimidating? I called out, my tail swishing confidently. I've seen scarier decorations at a kindergarten party. At least I wasn't raised by wolves, Lysandra shot back, then glanced apologetically at Kyle. No offense to present company. Actually, Kyle drawled, wolves have excellent taste in interior design. You should see our holiday arrangements. The enchanted sausage, apparently feeling left out, conducted the orchestra into a dramatic crescendo. The violins were practically vibrating with intensity. I felt another surge of dragon power building within me. But this time it was different. Instead of fire, I felt a strange resonance with the moonlight itself. My scales began to glow with an inner light, casting prismatic patterns across the courtyard. Oh, fascinating, Theron exclaimed. She's channeling lunar magic. This hasn't been seen since the Great Dragon Moth War of 42. The what now? I managed to ask before the moonlight condensed around me like liquid silver. Long story, lots of property damage. Several moths still hold grudges. Theron waved dismissively. Focus on the fight. The moonlight responded to my will, forming into shimmering barriers that deflected Lysandra's spells. Each magical projectile she launched was caught in the silvery light and transformed into harmless sparkles. That's cheating. Lysandra stamped her foot. You can't use dragon magic in a proper duel. Actually, Theron materialized between us, holding what appeared to be a ghostly rulebook. According to Section 5, Subsection 3, all inherent magical abilities, including but not limited to dragon breath, werewolf transformations, and interpretive dance, are considered valid in formal duels. You just made that up. Did I? Theron grinned. Care to risk being disqualified on a technicality? The duel reached its climax as moonlight and magic clashed in spectacular fashion. My newfound lunar powers had transformed the courtyard into a kaleidoscope of silver light and dancing shadows. The enchanted sausage, thoroughly invested in the drama, had the orchestra playing what sounded suspiciously like the final boss theme from a video game. You want to see real magic? Lysandra snarled, raising her wand high. Let's see how you handle this. She began an intricate series of gestures, dark energy crackling around her. The air grew heavy with forbidden magic. Oh dear, Theron's eyes widened. That's a rather nasty curse she's preparing. Technically illegal in 7 realms and frowned upon at dinner parties. Any suggestions? I asked, my tail twitching nervously. Well, according to ancient dragon lore, when faced with overwhelming dark magic, one should. He paused dramatically. Wing it. That was a terrible pun. I've been dead for centuries. My humor is naturally decomposed. Before I could respond, Lysandra unleashed her spell, a writhing mass of shadows that rushed toward me like a tidal wave of darkness. The crowd gasped. Kyle took a step forward, his amber eyes glowing with concern. But something strange happened. As the dark magic approached, my scales began to resonate with the moonlight. The silver glow intensified until I was practically incandescent. Without thinking, I spread my wings wide and let out a roar that shook the very foundations of the Institute. The moonlight responded, condensing into a brilliant shield that not only stopped Lysandra's curse, but reflected it back at her. She had just enough time to look surprised before her own dark magic engulfed her, transforming her expensive dueling robes into what appeared to be a very fashionable potato sack. That's not fair, she spluttered, trying to maintain dignity while wearing vegetable-based clothing. Actually, Theron consulted his ghostly rulebook again. Karmic fashion disasters are specifically mentioned in the appendix under acceptable duel outcomes, right between spontaneous tap dancing and temporary transformation into baked goods. The crowd erupted in cheers. The enchanted sausage conducted a triumphant finale, and even the statues seemed to be applauding. Kyle approached me, his eyes shining with admiration. That, he said softly, was the most impressive display of magic I've ever seen. Thanks, I managed, suddenly very aware of how close he was standing, though I still have no idea how I did it. Sometimes, he smiled, reaching out to touch one of my shimmering scales. The most powerful magic comes naturally. Oh, please, Theron groaned, floating between us. Save the romantic tension for after we deal with the small fire in the rose garden. The what? We turned to see that yes, several rose bushes had indeed caught fire during the duel, and were now performing what appeared to be an impromptu flaming waltz. Well, I sighed, my tail curling around Kyle's wrist unconsciously. At least the insurance covers it? Chapter 7. The moon hung low and full over the Institute grounds as I made my nightly transformation back to human form. It was a strange sensation, watching my scales melt away like starlight, my wings folding into nothingness. The only reminder of my dragon self was a faint shimmer to my skin and an inexplicable craving for rare meat. You know, Theron materialized beside me, making me jump. Most people would be thrilled to have a daily magical makeover. It's like having 2 wardrobes for the price of 1 body. Most people aren't accidentally engaged to a werewolf while pretending to be a monster, I pointed out, stretching my now wing-free shoulders. The enchanted sausage, which had been dozing in midair, perked up at the mention of werewolves and began playing a romantic ballad. Will you stop that? I hissed at it. This is serious. Oh, very serious. Theron nodded solemnly. Almost as serious as the time Professor Grimshaw's experimental love potion turned all the garden gnomes into passionate opera singers. The rose garden has never been the same. I was about to respond when a familiar voice echoed down the corridor. Lyrian. And he wasn't alone. Quick, Theron whispered unnecessarily. Hide behind that conveniently placed suit of armor. I ducked behind the armor just as Lyrian rounded the corner, engaged in what appeared to be a heated argument with. Was that a talking teapot? I pressed myself further behind the armor as Lyrian continued his heated conversation with the teapot. This is absolutely unacceptable. The teapot huffed, steam puffing from its spout. I was supposed to be transformed back hours ago. Do you have any idea how difficult it is to maintain one's dignity as a porcelain beverage container? Professor Grimshaw, Lyrian pinched the bridge of his nose. I assure you, we're doing everything possible to reverse the transformation. But perhaps if you hadn't interrupted Ilukar's spell practice. Interrupted? I was simply trying to prevent that boy from turning the entire faculty into kitchenware. Though I must admit, Dean Thornhaven makes a rather fetching sugar bowl. The enchanted sausage, apparently finding this entire situation hilarious, began playing the jaunty tea-time melody. Shh! I hissed at it, but too late. What was that? Lyrian turned sharply, his eyes scanning the corridor. Probably just another enchanted meat product, the teapot professor sniffed. This institute has gone completely to pot since my transformation. Pun absolutely intended. I held my breath as Lyrian approached my hiding spot. Just then, Theron materialized directly in front of him. "Ah, Lyrian," the ghost exclaimed with theatrical surprise. "Just the elf I was looking for. I've been meaning to discuss your latest essay on the proper etiquette of magical duels. Fascinating reading, though I must question your interpretation of Section 12, Paragraph 3, regarding the appropriate use of interpretive dance during combat." As Theron expertly steered Lyrian and the professor turned teapot away, I caught a glimpse of something unusual in Lyrian's hand, what appeared to be an ancient scroll covered in strange symbols. The scroll in Lyrian's hand pulsed with an eerie blue light, casting strange shadows on the stone walls. As I strained to get a better look, the enchanted sausage suddenly perked up, vibrating with unusual intensity. "What's wrong?" I whispered to it. "Do you recognize that scroll?" The sausage performed what could only be described as an anxious aerial pirouette. The scroll appears to be written in ancient sausage. Theron materialized beside me, making me jump. A language lost to time, known only to the most dedicated of meat scholars. "You're making that up, only partially. The scroll is genuinely ancient, though I doubt it has anything to do with processed meats. However," he stroked his translucent chin thoughtfully, "the symbols do look remarkably similar to those found in the restricted section of the library, specifically in books about transformative magic." My heart skipped a beat. "You mean, indeed, that scroll might hold the key to understanding your unique condition. Or," he added with a ghostly shrug, "it could be Lyrian's grandmother's secret recipe for pickled turnips." Ancient magical texts are notoriously difficult to interpret. Just then, Professor Grimshaw the teapot let out a particularly loud whistle. "I simply cannot continue this conversation until I'm restored to my proper form. Do you have any idea how difficult it is to grade papers without hands? At least you're not a sugar bowl like Dean Thornhaven," Lyrian sighed. "He keeps complaining about students dipping spoons in him during tea time." As they moved away, I made a mental note of the scroll's appearance. If it really did contain information about transformative magic, perhaps it could help me understand my dragon hybrid condition, or even find a way to control it. "We need to get that scroll," I whispered to Theron. "Breaking into Lyrian's private quarters to steal an ancient magical artifact?" Theron's eyes gleamed with mischievous delight. "Now that sounds like a proper ghost-approved adventure." The enchanted sausage bobbed enthusiastically, already composing what sounded like a heist movie soundtrack. As Lyrian and Professor Grimshaw the teapot disappeared around the corner, I emerged from my hiding spot, my mind racing with possibilities. "So," I whispered to Theron, "how exactly does one break into an elf's private quarters?" "With style, obviously." The ghost grinned. "Though I should warn you, Lyrian's quarters are protected by various magical wards. Last week, a first-year student tried to sneak in and ended up speaking in limericks for 3 days straight. The enchanted sausage, apparently excited by the prospect of a heist, began playing what sounded suspiciously like Mission Impossible. Not helping. I hissed at it. "We need a plan." "Well," Theron stroked his translucent chin, "there are 3 ways into Lyrian's quarters. The main door, which is heavily warded, the window, which is guarded by carnivorous ivy, and the secret passage behind the painting of dancing druids." "There's a secret passage?" "Of course. This is a magical institute. Secret passages are practically mandatory, though this one has a slight quirk." "What kind of quirk?" "It only opens if you perform the exact dance the druids are doing in the painting, and they change their routine every hour." I groaned. "Perfect. So our options are get turned into a limerick-speaking statue, be eaten by plants, or embarrass myself with interpretive dance." "Look on the bright side," Theron offered cheerfully. "At least you don't have to worry about the dance when you're in dragon form. The passage recognizes magical creatures as honorary druids." That's oddly specific. The founder of the institute had a peculiar sense of humor. "You should see the library's entrance requirements. Every 3rd Tuesday, you have to enter while juggling books and singing opera." Just then, we heard footsteps approaching again. The enchanted sausage quickly switched to innocent elevator music. Tomorrow night, I decided. We'll get that scroll when I'm in dragon form. And Theron? Yes? If you even think about recording my druid dance, I'll find a way to exorcise you. Me? Never, he gasped in mock offense. Though I can't speak for the sausage, it's been working on its cinematography skills. Chapter 8. The next evening found me lurking in the shadows near the painting of dancing druids, watching as the figures twirled and leaped in increasingly complex patterns. My dragon form shimmered in the moonlight, scales catching the torchlight from nearby sconces. Remember, Theron whispered, timing is everything. The druids changed their routine at exactly midnight. The enchanted sausage floated nearby, providing what it considered appropriate heist music. A strange mix of classical ballet and spy movie themes. Could you please tell it to stop? I hissed. We're trying to be stealthy here. The sausage is an artist, Theron sniffed. One doesn't simply silence artistic expression. I watched as the druids in the painting performed what appeared to be a combination of interpretive dance and aggressive gardening. One particularly enthusiastic druid was pirouetting while wielding a ceremonial rake. Are you sure this passage recognizes dragon hybrids as honorary druids? I asked nervously. Absolutely. Though there was that one incident with a chimera who had to tap dance for 3 hours because the painting didn't recognize its goat parts as sufficiently druidic. Not helping Theron. Just then, we heard voices approaching. The enchanted sausage immediately switched to innocent elevator music. Quick, Theron whispered. It's almost midnight. The passage will open for exactly 7 seconds during the routine change. The voices grew closer as I watched the painting intently. The druids were now performing what looked like an interpretive dance version of advanced calculus, complete with geometric shapes formed by their synchronized movements. 3T201. Theron counted down. At exactly midnight, the druids froze mid-pirouette. For a brief moment, the painting shimmered with an otherworldly light. I stepped forward, my dragon form casting prismatic reflections on the stone walls. The enchanted sausage, caught up in the moment, began playing what sounded like a dramatic fusion of ballet music and heavy metal. Now, Theron urged. Quick, before. Before what? A familiar voice asked from behind us. We turned to find Kyle leaning against the wall, his amber eyes glowing in the darkness. He looked particularly wolfish in the moonlight, and there was something both amused and predatory in his smile. Ah, Kale, Theron exclaimed with obviously fake surprise. What brings you to this particular corridor at this exact moment? Surely not the weekly Midnight Druid Dance Appreciation Society meeting. The what? Kyle raised an eyebrow. Oh yes, very exclusive club. Only ghosts and dragon hybrids allowed, and occasionally enchanted meat products, he added, as the sausage performed an elaborate aerial twist. I remained perfectly still, hoping my dragon form would somehow blend into the shadows. You know, Kyle said conversationally, pushing off from the wall, if you're trying to break into Lyrian's quarters, there's an easier way. An easier way? I asked skeptically, my dragon tail twitching with curiosity. Kyle pushed himself away from the wall and approached us. You see, as his teaching assistant, I happened to have access to his quarters. The enchanted sausage, apparently recognizing its original owner, performed an excited loop-de-loop and switched to playing what sounded suspiciously like a romantic ballad. That's convenient, I said carefully, trying to ignore how the moonlight caught in Kyle's amber eyes. But why would you help us break in? Because, he smiled, showing just a hint of fang, I've seen that scroll too, and I recognize ancient transformation magic when I see it. Being a werewolf does give one certain insights into magical shape-shifting. Theron floated between us, his ghostly form shimmering with excitement. Oh, this is perfect. A werewolf, a dragon hybrid, and a ghost breaking into an elf's quarters to steal an ancient artifact. It's like the setup for a particularly questionable joke. Don't forget the musical sausage, I added dryly. Ah, yes, our orchestral meat product. Every heist needs a soundtrack. Kyle reached into his pocket and pulled out a key that seemed to be made of moonlight. So, he said, his eyes meeting mine, Shall we commit some light treason together? You know this is probably a terrible idea, I pointed out. The best ideas usually are. He grinned. Besides, I'm curious to see what other forms you might take. The dragon look suits you, but I bet you'd make an adorable werewolf. The enchanted sausage immediately launched into what sounded like a wedding march. Not helping. I growled at it. Using Kyl's moonlight key, we made our way through a series of hidden corridors that seemed to shift and change in the darkness. The enchanted sausage had mercifully switched to playing stealthy spy music at a lower volume. Lyrian's quarters are just ahead, Kyle whispered, his amber eyes glowing as he navigated the shadows. But there's something you should know about the scroll. Before he could finish, we heard a familiar voice echoing through the corridor. Absolutely unacceptable. It was Professor Grimshaw the teapot again. First, I'm transformed into kitchenware, and now students are stealing ancient artifacts. Stay calm, Professor, came Lyrian's voice. The scroll is safely locked away in my... The voices were getting closer. I pressed myself against the wall, my dragon scales thankfully blending with the shadows better than expected. Quick, Theron hissed, into the broom closet. The what? I started to ask, but Kyle had already pulled me into a tiny space that definitely hadn't been there a moment ago. The enchanted sausage squeezed in after us, now playing what sounded suspiciously like romantic mood music. Really? I whispered to it. Now? Shh, Kyle breathed, and I became acutely aware of how close we were standing. His werewolf warmth seemed to radiate through my scales, and there was something almost electric about the way his amber eyes met mine in the darkness. Oh, for ghost's sake, Theron muttered, floating halfway through the door. Save the romantic tension for after we steal the potentially dangerous magical artifact. The voices passed by our hiding spot, and I could have sworn I heard Professor Grimshaw Teapot muttering something about young love these days, and at least they're not turning each other into kitchen implements. Once the voices of Lyrian and Professor Grimshaw the Teapot faded away, we emerged from the cramped broom closet. The enchanted sausage was still humming a romantic tune, which earned it a stern glare from both me and Kyle. Lyrian's quarters are just ahead, Kyle whispered, his moonlight key glowing softly. But there's something you should know about the scroll. Let me guess, I interrupted, my dragon tail swishing nervously. It's cursed? Worse, he grinned. It's written in ancient elvish poetry. Oh, the horror, Theron gasped dramatically, clutching his translucent chest. Ancient elvish poetry is notorious for its creative interpretation of grammar. One misplaced comma and suddenly you're summoning tea-tap dancing daemons instead of making tea. We approached a door that seemed to shimmer with magical energy. Various runes pulsed along its frame, and I could have sworn I heard it humming what sounded like an ancient elvish lullaby. Ready? Kyle asked, holding up the moonlight key. The enchanted sausage switched to what it apparently considered appropriate breaking and entering music, a mix of classical orchestra and spy movie themes. As ready as I'll ever be, I replied, watching as Kyle inserted the key into a lock that materialized out of thin air. The doors swung open with a melodious creak, revealing Lyrian's quarters, a vast chamber filled with floating books, glowing crystals, and what appeared to be a small indoor garden where various magical plants swayed to an unseen breeze. Typical elf, Theron sniffed. All aesthetics, no practicality, though I must admit the self-watering moonflowers are a nice touch. The scroll should be in his study, Kyle whispered, leading us past a collection of enchanted musical instruments that seemed to be rehearsing a concerto without musicians. But be careful. Lyrian's quite fond of magical traps. As if on cue, a nearby potted plant suddenly sneezed, releasing a cloud of sparkly pollen. Duck, Theron shouted. We dropped to the floor as the pollen cloud drifted overhead, turning a passing moth into what appeared to be a tiny flying teacup. Well, I muttered, watching the teacup moth flutter away. At least we know where Professor Grimshaw's transformation came from. The enchanted sausage, apparently finding this hilarious, started playing circus music. This way. Kyle gestured toward an ornate door covered in elvish runes. The scroll should be in his private study, but there's something else you should know. Before he could finish, we heard footsteps approaching again, multiple sets this time. Oh dear, Theron's ghostly form flickered anxiously. It seems our time has run out. The footsteps grew louder, accompanied by multiple voices, Lyrian's, Professor Grimshaw the teapots, and was that Dean Thornhaven the sugar bowl? Quick! Kyle grabbed my scaled hand. Behind the enchanted bookshelf! We ducked behind an enormous bookcase filled with tomes that whispered ancient secrets as we passed. The enchanted sausage wedged itself between two books about proper magical etiquette and immediately began playing suspenseful music in pianissimo. As I was trying to tell you, Kyle whispered, his amber eyes glowing in the darkness, the scroll isn't just about transformation magic. It's absolutely certain the intruders came this way. Lyrian's voice cut through the air. The magical sensors detected unauthorized dragon energy. Dragon energy? Professor Grimshaw whistled. In my day, students stuck to turning each other into frogs, much more traditional. At least frogs don't steal sugar cubes, came Dean Thornhaven's distinctly bull-like voice. I pressed closer to the bookshelf, feeling the ancient wood pulse with magical energy. Kale's warmth radiated beside me, and I couldn't help but notice how his werewolf scent seemed to mingle with my dragon essence in an oddly complimentary way. The scroll, there unhissed, floating partially through the bookcase, is glowing. Sure enough, through a gap in the books, we could see a bright blue light emanating from Lyrian's study. "Oh dear," Professor Grimshaw the teapot said. "That can't be good." The blue light from Lyrian's study grew more intense, casting eerie shadows through the gaps in the bookshelf. The enchanted sausage had stopped playing music entirely, which was probably not a good sign. "The scroll is reacting to your presence," Kyle whispered urgently. "It's what I've been trying to tell you. It's not just about transformation magic. It's specifically about dragon hybrid transformations." "What?" I hissed back, my scales tingling with an odd resonance. "Indeed. Theron materialized partially through the bookshelf. And if I'm not mistaken, that particular shade of blue means it's activating." Lyrian's voice rang out. "Everyone, stand back." The blue light suddenly intensified, and I felt a strange pulling sensation in my chest. My dragon form began to shimmer, and I could feel the magic responding to something ancient and powerful. "Oh dear," Professor Grimshaw. The teapot whistled nervously. "This reminds me of the great teapot incident of—" "Hold on!" Kyle grabbed my hand as the magical energy began to swirl around us. The enchanted sausage, caught in the mystical current, started playing what sounded like dramatic opera mixed with rock music. "The scroll." Lyrian's voice cut through the chaos. "It's trying to connect with something, or someone." I felt my dragon form shifting, changing, responding to the ancient magic. Kyle's grip tightened, his werewolf warmth anchoring me as the transformation magic pulsed through my body. "Well," Theron observed cheerfully as the room filled with swirling blue light, "this should be interesting." Chapter 10. The blue magical energy swirled around me, making my scales tingle and shimmer. Kyle's hand was still firmly gripping mine, his werewolf warmth a steady anchor in the chaos. The enchanted sausage had switched to playing what sounded like an epic movie soundtrack. "The scroll is responding to her dragon essence." Lyrian's voice cut through the magical storm. "But there's something else. A werewolf signature? Oh, how romantic," Professor Grimshaw the teapot whistled. "A dragon hybrid and a werewolf. It's like one of those trashy romance novels in the restricted section." "I heard that," Dean Thornhaven the sugar bowl chimed in. "Those are purely for academic research." The magic intensified, and I felt my form shifting, changing. But this time it was different. Instead of the usual transformation, I felt Kyle's werewolf energy mixing with my dragon essence. Theron?" I managed to say through gritted teeth. "What's happening?" "Well," the ghost observed, looking absolutely delighted, "it appears the ancient scroll is attempting to create a perfect balance between your dragon form and Kyle's werewolf nature. Though I must say, the color combination is rather interesting." I looked down at my scales, which were now shifting between midnight blue and wolf silver, creating an otherworldly shimmer. "Lady Rosalind is going to love this," Kyle muttered, his amber eyes wide with a mix of awe and amusement. The magical energy continued to swirl around us, creating a dazzling display of blue and silver light. My new form was a perfect blend of dragon and wolf, midnight blue scales with silver markings that resembled wolf fur patterns, and wings that seemed to shimmer with moonlight. "Oh, this is absolutely perfect," Theron exclaimed, clapping his ghostly hands. "Lady Rosalind will be thrilled her future daughter-in-law is now part werewolf, not helping." Kyle and I growled in unison. The enchanted sausage, caught up in the moment, began playing what sounded like wedding bells mixed with dragon roars. "The transformation is stabilizing." Lyrian's voice came from the other side of the bookshelf. "But I've never seen anything like this before. The scroll wasn't supposed to. To create the perfect magical hybrid?" Professor Grimshaw the teapot finished. "My dear boy, sometimes the most powerful magic comes from unexpected combinations, like Earl Grey and raspberry jam. Or sugar cubes and moonlight," Dean Thornhaven the sugar bowl added sagely. I looked at Kyle, whose amber eyes were fixed on my new form with a mixture of awe and something else I couldn't quite identify. "Well," he said with a slight smile, "at least now you'll fit right in at Wolfsbane Keep." The magical energy finally settled, leaving me standing in my new hybrid form, a perfect blend of dragon and werewolf. The bookshelf we were hiding behind had somehow survived the magical storm, though several books were now floating and reciting ancient poetry in protest. "We need to move," Kyle whispered urgently. "They'll find us any second." But before we could make our escape, a familiar voice rang out. "Well, well," Lady Rosalind stepped into view, her elegant werewolf form radiating authority. "When I said I wanted my future daughter-in-law to embrace our family traditions, this wasn't quite what I had in mind." The enchanted sausage, apparently recognizing a matriarch when it saw one, immediately switched to playing a regal fanfare. "Lady Rosalind," Lyrian exclaimed. "I can explain." "Oh, hush!" She waved a perfectly manicured claw at him. "I know exactly what's happening here. The ancient scroll has recognized the bond between them. Really, Kale, you could have just told me you were courting a dragon hybrid." "I wasn't," Kyle started. "We weren't," I tried to explain. "Oh, this is better than those romance novels in the restricted section." Professor Grimshaw the teapot whistled excitedly. "Which we keep purely for academic purposes," Dean Thornhaven the sugar bowl added hastily. Theron floated between us all, looking absolutely delighted. "Well," he grinned, "I suppose this means the wedding at Wolfsbane Keep is still on?" Lady Rosalind circled me, examining my new dragon-wolf hybrid form with an appraising eye. Silver markings, midnight blue scales, and just the right amount of dramatic flair. Perfect for a future lady of Wolfsbane Keep. "Mother," Kyle started, but she silenced him with a raised paw. "Don't mother me, dear. I knew something was special about her the moment you mentioned the stolen sausage incident. Only your true mate would have the audacity to steal your prized, enchanted meat product." The sausage in question performed a proud aerial twist and started playing what sounded suspiciously like "Here Comes the Bride," mixed with dragon roars. "This is all very touching," Lyrian interrupted. "But might I point out that they broke into my quarters and activated an ancient, potentially dangerous magical artifact?" "Oh, hush," Professor Grimshaw the teapot whistled. "Young love requires a little rule-breaking now and then. Remember the great teapot incident?" "Which we never speak of," Dean Thornhaven the sugar bowl added firmly. I caught Kyle's eye, and for a moment we shared a look of mutual panic and something else. Something that made my new wolf-dragon heart skip a beat. "Well," Theron floated between us all, grinning like a ghost who just won the afterlife lottery, "I suppose this means we can move on to planning the wedding? I do so love a good ceremony, especially when it involves potentially explosive magical transformations." Lady Rosalind's eyes lit up. "Oh, yes! We'll need to start preparations immediately. The full moon is in just 2 weeks, perfect for a traditional werewolf ceremony, though we'll need to adjust some things for the dragon aspects." 2 weeks? I squeaked, my new form's tail twitching nervously. "Of course, dear," Lady Rosalind smiled, showing an impressive array of fangs. "Can't have my future daughter-in-law running around unmarried now that the ancient scroll has blessed her union. What would the other werewolf clans say?" Chapter 11. The Great Hall of Wolfsbane Keep buzzed with activity as preparations for the upcoming full moon wedding went into full swing. Lady Rosalind had unleashed an army of werewolf decorators, each more enthusiastic than the last about incorporating both werewolf and dragon themes into every possible surface. Perhaps some flame-resistant flower arrangements, one suggested, and silver moonstone arches that won't actually harm the werewolf guests, another chimed in. I stood in the middle of the chaos, my new dragon-wolf hybrid form drawing admiring glances from the werewolf clan members. The enchanted sausage floated nearby, providing what it considered appropriate background music, a mix of wedding marches and dragon battle cries. "This is getting out of hand," I whispered to Kyle, who looked equally overwhelmed. "Welcome to werewolf wedding planning," he muttered back. "Last time my cousin got married, the cake tried to eat the guests." "Oh, that was nothing." Theron materialized beside us, grinning. "You should have seen the great teapot wedding of '85. Professor Grimshaw still can't look at Earl Grey the same way." Suddenly, I felt a strange tingling sensation in my scales. Looking down, I saw an intricate pattern beginning to form, silvery marks that seemed to pulse with magical energy. "Oh dear," Theron's ghostly form flickered with concern. "That looks like a binding mark." The silvery marks continued to spread across my scales, creating intricate patterns that seemed to pulse with moonlight. Lady Rosalind immediately stopped her wedding planning and rushed over, her eyes wide with recognition. "The ancient binding mark," she breathed. "I haven't seen this in centuries." The enchanted sausage, sensing the gravity of the moment, switched to playing dramatic orchestral music with a hint of wolf howls. "What exactly is happening to me?" I asked, watching as the marks formed what looked like a combination of wolf runes and dragon script. "The scroll's magic," Kyle explained, his amber eyes fixed on the spreading patterns. "It's creating a permanent bond between our magical signatures." "Oh, this is absolutely fascinating," Theron exclaimed, floating closer to examine the marks. "The last time I saw something like this was during the Great Teapot incident, though that was less about magical binding and more about accidentally turning an entire wedding party into a tea service." "The marks are a sign," Lady Rosalind said solemnly. "They indicate that the magic recognizes you as true mates, a perfect balance between dragon and wolf." "But I didn't agree to," I started to protest. "Magic doesn't care about agreements, dear," Lady Rosalind smiled. "It cares about truth. And these marks don't lie." The enchanted sausage performed a celebratory loop-de-loop and started playing what sounded suspiciously like a wolf-dragon love ballad. The silvery marks continued to pulse across my scales as Lady Rosalind examined them with growing excitement. The great hall of Wolfsbane Keep had fallen silent, save for the enchanted sausage's dramatic background score. "These particular runes," Lady Rosalind traced one of the marks with a careful claw, "represent the union of moon and flame. And here," she pointed to another, "is the ancient symbol for eternal bonds." "Eternal?" I squeaked, my new wolf-dragon tail curling anxiously. "Oh, yes," Theron floated closer, peering at the marks, though not quite as permanent as the Great Teapot incident. "Professor Grimshaw is still serving Earl Grey, after all." Kyle stepped forward, his amber eyes fixed on the marks. "There's something else," he said quietly. "Look at how they're arranging themselves." The silvery patterns were indeed shifting, forming what looked like a map of constellations across my scales. "The star-crossed pattern," Lady Rosalind breathed. "It's said to appear only when two souls are bound across different realms." "Different realms?" I looked at Kyle in confusion. "Well," he said, running a hand through his hair nervously, "there's something I've been meaning to tell you about your world and ours." The enchanted sausage, sensing another dramatic revelation approaching, switched to playing an intense orchestral piece with both wolf howls and dragon roars woven through it. "Your world and ours have always been connected," Kyle began, his amber eyes serious. "The star-crossed pattern appears when someone bridges both realms, becoming a true child of both worlds. Like when someone falls through a magical portal after being pushed off a roof?" I asked dryly. "Precisely," Theron exclaimed, though usually with less attempted murder and more ceremonial purpose. Lady Rosalind circled us, her elegant form radiating authority. "This explains everything, why the scroll responded so strongly, why the transformation was so perfect. You're not just any dragon hybrid, dear. You're a bridge walker." The enchanted sausage performed an impressive aerial spiral and started playing what sounded like a mystical revelation theme. A bridge walker? I looked down at the constellation patterns spreading across my scales. One who can exist in both realms without losing their essence, Kyle explained. It's incredibly rare. The last known bridge walker was Professor Grimshaw, Lady Rosalind finished. Before the Great Teapot incident, of course. Which explains why he makes such excellent interdimensional tea, Theron added helpfully. I caught Kyle's gaze, seeing a mix of wonder and concern in his eyes. So what does this mean for us? It means, Lady Rosalind smiled, showing her impressive fangs, that the wedding just got much more interesting. We'll need to incorporate both realms' customs, of course, and someone will need to explain to your university friends why their classmate is marrying a werewolf. Oh dear, I muttered, my new tail curling anxiously. Don't worry, Kyle whispered, taking my hand. At least Lysandra can't push you off any more roofs. The enchanted sausage, caught up in the moment, started playing a triumphant melody that somehow managed to combine Here Comes the Bride with both wolf howls and interdimensional portal sounds. Chapter 12. The great hall of Wolfsbane Keep was unusually quiet as a familiar figure stepped through the massive oak doors. My heart nearly stopped when I recognized him, Phalar, my university friend, and looking completely at ease in this magical realm. The enchanted sausage, sensing the dramatic tension, began playing an ominous melody with undertones of revelation. Well, Phalar said, though his voice now carried a different accent and power I'd never heard before. I see you've managed to get yourself into quite the situation, Celestia. Phalar, I whispered, my new dragon wolf form bristling with confusion. What are you doing here? He smiled, but it wasn't the casual grin I remembered from university. This was the smile of someone who held ancient secrets. Actually, in this realm, I'm known as Orden. I'm a realm observer, sent to study the human world. And you, my dear friend, have caused quite the stir in both worlds. Lady Rosalind stepped forward, her elegant werewolf form radiating authority. Orden? The Orden? The legendary mage who wrote Cross-Realm Dynamics and Their Impact on Magical Transformations. The very same. He bowed slightly. Though I must say, your coffee shop disguise in the human realm is equally impressive, Lady Rosalind. Wait, I interrupted, my tail twitching with growing confusion. Lady Rosalind owns the coffee shop near campus? Where did you think Kyle got his barista skills? Theron materialized, grinning. Though I must say, the way he makes a caramel macchiato is almost as impressive as his werewolf transformation. Kyle, standing beside me, looked equally stunned. Mother, you never mentioned. A lady must have her hobbies, Lady Rosalind sniffed. Besides, someone had to keep an eye on the human realm's magical convergence points. Orden Phalar moved closer, examining the star-crossed pattern on my scales. The transformation was unexpected, he admitted, when Lysandra pushed you off that roof. Which was completely against protocol, Lady Rosalind interrupted sharply. That girl's going to lose her interdimensional observation privileges. You should have simply fallen through the safety net spell I'd placed there. Instead, you triggered an ancient magical resonance that transformed you into something entirely new. A bridgewalker with both dragon and werewolf essence? Unprecedented. The enchanted sausage, apparently overwhelmed by all the revelations, started playing a mashup of dramatic orchestral music, coffee shop jazz, and wolf howls. So everyone, I said slowly, looking around the room, everyone I knew in my world was actually magical beings observing the human realm? Theron finished cheerfully. Oh yes. Even that grumpy librarian. Though in her defense, she's much pleasanter as a phoenix. The university itself sits on a major convergence point, Orden explained. We've been studying the interaction between realms for centuries, though I must say, none of our research predicted. This, he gestured to my hybrid form and the magical marks that bound me to Kyle. And now, Lady Rosalind smiled, showing her impressive fangs. Thanks to your unexpected transformation and the ancient binding magic, our two realms are more connected than ever, which means the wedding will need to accommodate guests from both worlds, Theron finished excitedly. Oh, this will be even better than the Great Teapot incident. I looked at Kyle, who seemed to be processing the revelation that his mother was a coffee shop owner as much as I was processing everything else. "So what happens now?" "Now," Orden said seriously, "we need to talk about your role as a bridge walker and what it means for both realms. But first," he grinned, finally looking more like the Phalar I knew, "perhaps we should discuss how you managed to steal Kyl's prized enchanted sausage without any magical training whatsoever." The revelations continue to unfold in the Great Hall of Wolfsbane Keep as Orden Phalar explained more about the complex relationship between our worlds. The enchanted sausage, seemingly overwhelmed by the gravity of the situation, had switched to playing a thoughtful classical piece interwoven with mystical harmonies. "The university isn't just any school," Orden continued, pacing the hall with practiced elegance. "It's a carefully constructed observation point where magical beings can study human behavior and monitor the flow of magical energy between realms. Every professor, every administrator, even the cafeteria staff, all magical beings in disguise." "Even grumpy old Professor Blackwood?" I asked, remembering that perpetually irritated mathematics teacher. "Ah, yes," Lady Rosalind chuckled. "He's actually a rather distinguished dragon elder. The human disguise helps him control his tendency to set things on fire when students get basic calculus wrong." Kyle, who had been unusually quiet, finally spoke up. "So when you assigned me to work at the coffee shop, Mother, I needed someone to monitor the convergence point beneath the espresso machine," Lady Rosalind replied matter-of-factly. "Though I must say your latte art has improved tremendously." "The coffee shop serves as a neutral ground," Orden explained. "A place where beings from both realms can interact without realizing it. The magical energy in those pumpkin spice lattes isn't just for flavor, you know." Theron floated excitedly around us. "Oh, this reminds me of the great caffeine catastrophe of '79, though that was less about interdimensional observation and more about accidentally turning all the customers into various types of coffee beans." "But what about Lysandra?" I asked, my new wolf dragon tail swishing with agitation. "Why did she push me off the roof?" Orden's expression darkened. Lysandra was supposed to be monitoring the portal's stability. Instead, she let her personal feelings interfere with her duties. She's been recalled to the High Council for Disciplinary Action. She's currently serving as a teaching assistant to Professor Grimshaw the Teapot, Lady Rosalind added with a satisfied smirk. "Nothing teaches humility quite like having to brew Earl Grey for eternity." The enchanted sausage performed a vindictive little twirl and played a few bars of triumphant music. "But now we face a more immediate challenge," Orden said seriously. "Your transformation and binding to Kyle has created an unprecedented magical situation. The star-crossed pattern on your scales indicates that you're not just a bridge walker, you're a realm anchor." "A what?" Kyle and I asked simultaneously. "Someone who can stabilize the connection between worlds," Lady Rosalind explained, "which means your wedding won't just be a union of two people. It will be a ceremony that helps maintain the balance between realms." "No pressure," Theron added cheerfully. "Though if it helps, the last realm anchor wedding only caused 3 minor dimensional rifts and 1 temporary reversal of gravity." I looked at Kyle, who reached out and took my hand, his warm grip steadying my nerves. "We'll figure this out," he said softly. "We're together." Yes, very romantic," Orden smiled. "But first, we really must discuss that sausage theft. The magical theory behind how you managed it without any training is absolutely fascinating." As the revelations continued to unfold in Wolfsbane Keep, another figure emerged from the shadows, my cat, Philomena, who had been mysteriously absent since my arrival in this realm. But she wasn't just padding along normally. She was floating, her fur shimmering with an otherworldly glow. "Ah, yes," Orden smiled. "I was wondering when the Guardian would make her appearance." "Guardian?" I stared at my cat, who now wore an expression of distinct smugness. "Philomena is a magical guardian?" "Of course." Lady Rosalind nodded approvingly. "All bridge walkers need a guardian to help maintain their connection between realms, though usually they're a bit more traditional in form." The enchanted sausage performed an elaborate aerial dance around Philomena, who batted at it with a glowing paw. "Your cat," Kyle said slowly, "has been watching me make coffee for months. She knows all my barista secrets. And your werewolf secrets," Philomena spoke, her voice carrying the wisdom of ages. "Really, dear boy, you should be more careful about transforming behind the dumpster during full moons. The health department would have a fit." I sat down heavily, my new dragon wolf tail curling around my feet. "My cat can talk. My cat is a magical guardian. My university is a convergence point for magical realms. And my is actually an ancient mage. Don't forget about being magically bound to a werewolf barista," Theron added helpfully. "But that's still not as complicated as the Great Teapot incident. Which reminds me," Warden said, producing a thick tome from thin air. "We need to discuss your role in maintaining the balance between realms. According to the ancient texts, a bridgewalker bound to both worlds through love and magic has the power to." He was interrupted by a loud crash as the enchanted sausage, apparently trying to impress Philomena, accidentally knocked over a suit of armor. "Perhaps," Lady Rosalind suggested diplomatically, "we should continue this discussion over tea. Professor Grimshaw makes an excellent interdimensional blend. Just keep Lysandra away from the sugar cubes," Theron warned. "We don't need another incident involving temporally displaced sweeteners." As we made our way to the keep's dining hall, I caught Kyle's eye. Despite everything, the revelations, the magical bindings, my talking cat, he smiled at me with a warmth that made my heart flutter. "Well," he whispered, taking my hand, "at least our wedding will be interesting." "Interesting?" Philomena snorted, floating alongside us. "With a bridgewalker bride, a werewolf groom, a ghost as best man, and an enchanted sausage providing the music, it'll be legendary." The dining hall of Wolfsbane Keep buzzed with activity as Professor Grimshaw the Teapot served his famous interdimensional tea. The enchanted sausage had settled into playing a gentle background melody, while Philomena floated regally beside my chair, occasionally batting at passing magical sparks. "So," I said, trying to process everything, "not only am I a bridgewalker and bound to Kyle, but I'm also a realm anchor who has to help maintain the balance between worlds. And you still owe me an explanation about that sausage theft," Kyle added, though his eyes were twinkling. "The theft was actually quite impressive," Warden mused, sipping his tea. "Unconsciously using your latent bridgewalker abilities to temporarily phase through magical barriers, absolutely fascinating." Lady Rosalind beamed proudly. "You see, this is exactly why she's perfect for the family. Intelligence, cunning, and a natural talent for magical mayhem. Traditional werewolf qualities. Though perhaps we should discuss the more pressing matter," Philomena interrupted, her tail swishing with authority. "The wedding must take place during the next full moon, when the barriers between realms are thinnest. As her guardian, I insist on proper magical protocol." "Oh yes," Theron materialized with excitement. "We'll need to prepare the ancient binding circles, gather the moonstone crystals, and make sure the enchanted sausage is properly tuned for the ceremony." The sausage performed a proud little loop and played a few bars of wedding music. "And what about my studies?" I asked. "My life in the human realm?" "Oh, that's simple," Warden smiled. "You'll continue at the university, which, as you now know, is a magical observation point, though perhaps with fewer roof incidents. And I'll still be making coffee," Kyle added, squeezing my hand. "Someone has to monitor that interdimensional espresso machine." Lady Rosalind raised her teacup in a toast. "To new beginnings, bridged realms, and the most interesting wedding Wolfsbane Keep has seen since the Great Teapot incident, which we still don't talk about." Professor Grimshaw whistled steam in agreement. As everyone clinked their cups together, I looked around at this strange, magical family I'd somehow acquired. A werewolf fiancé, a ghost best man, a guardian cat, an ancient mage, and an enchanted sausage that provided the soundtrack to our adventures. Maybe falling through that portal wasn't such a bad thing after all. Chapter 13. The morning sun streamed through the stained glass windows of Wolfsbane Keep, casting multicolored patterns across the assembled werewolf clan. The great hall was packed with curious relatives, all eager to see the strange hybrid who had captured young Kyle's heart. The enchanted sausage floated near the ceiling, providing appropriately dramatic background music. Lady Rosalind stood at the head of the gathering, her elegant werewolf form commanding attention. "My dear family," she announced, "today we welcome a most unique addition to our clan. Celestia is not just any bride, she is a bridge walker, a realm anchor, and the first person clever enough to steal Kyle's enchanted sausage without getting caught." The sausage performed a proud little twirl at the mention of its involvement in our romance. "Actually," a familiar voice called from the back of the hall, "she's also my daughter." The crowd parted to reveal a tall, distinguished-looking man with silver-streaked hair and familiar eyes, my eyes. But instead of his usual business suit, he wore elaborate robes covered in shifting constellation patterns. "Dad?" I whispered, my new dragon wolf tail twitching with shock. "Hello, Starlight," he smiled, using his old nickname for me. "I believe it's time we had a talk about your mother's side of the family, particularly the dragon part." The enchanted sausage, sensing another major revelation approaching, switched to playing an appropriately dramatic orchestral piece, with hints of both dragon roars and family reunion themes. My father strode through the crowd of werewolves, his constellation-covered robes rippling with starlight. Behind him walked a tall, elegant woman with scales that shimmered like moonlight on water, my mother, whom I hadn't seen since I was a child. "We always knew this day would come," my mother said, her voice carrying the ancient power of dragonkind, though I must admit, I didn't expect it to involve an enchanted sausage and a werewolf barista. The sausage, recognizing the gravity of the moment, switched to playing a dramatic family reunion theme with hints of dragon song. "You're a dragon?" I whispered, staring at my mother. "All these years." "Half dragon," she corrected gently. "Your grandmother was one of the great dragon elders, which makes you, my dear, a quarter dragon by birth." The scroll merely awakened what was already there. Lady Rosalind stepped forward, her eyes gleaming. "Ah, so that's why the transformation was so perfect. Dragon blood and werewolf magic, a most fortuitous combination. We had to separate when you were young," my father explained. "The magical convergence points were unstable, and your mother needed to return to her realm to maintain the balance. And now," my mother smiled, "you've managed to bridge both worlds in a way we never could. A bridge walker, bound to a werewolf through ancient magic, carrying both dragon and wolf essence." Philomena floated between us, her guardian aura glowing brightly. "I told you she'd figure it out eventually, though I must say the sausage theft was an unexpected touch." The great hall of Wolfsbane keep hummed with excited whispers as my parents stepped forward. The enchanted sausage, sensing the gravity of the moment, began playing an intricate melody that wove together dragon songs and wolf howls into a haunting harmony. "There's more," my mother said, her scales shimming like moonlight on water. "The scroll you found, the one that triggered your transformation, it wasn't just any magical artifact. It was my grandmother's, the dragon elder Celestia, for whom you were named. The scroll was meant to find its way to you," my father added, the constellations on his robes shifting like living stars. "We knew that when your dragon blood awakened, you would need guidance. Though I must admit, we didn't expect it to happen quite so dramatically." Lady Rosalind laughed, her elegant werewolf form radiating amusement. "Dramatic is putting it mildly. Your daughter stole my son's prized enchanted sausage, terrorized half the institute, and managed to get herself magically bound to a werewolf barista. In her defense," Theron materialized, grinning, "it's still not as chaotic as the Great Teapot incident." Philomena floated between us, her guardian aura pulsing with approval. The timing was perfect, actually. The convergence of realms has been growing stronger, and we needed someone who could bridge both worlds. Who better than a quarter dragon, magically bound werewolf bride with a talent for chaos and theft, Kyle added, wrapping an arm around my waist. "Don't forget the theft." The enchanted sausage performed an elaborate aerial dance, apparently trying to reenact its own kidnapping. "Your grandmother would be proud," my mother smiled. "She always said the best magic comes from following your heart, even if it leads you to steal enchanted breakfast meats. Though perhaps we should discuss the more practical matters," my father suggested. "Like how to manage your studies at the magical convergence point. I mean, university. while also fulfilling your duties as a realm anchor, and planning a wedding that accommodates both werewolves and dragons," Lady Rosalind added enthusiastically. "We'll need flame-resistant decorations, of course, and proper moon phase alignment," Philomena noted. "And enough interdimensional tea for everyone," Theron chimed in. I looked around at my strange, magical family, my dragon mother, my constellation-robed father, my werewolf future mother-in-law, my ghost best man, my guardian cat, and my werewolf fiancée. Even the enchanted sausage seemed to belong, floating above us all like a peculiar blessing. "Well," I said, my dragon wolf tail swishing with contentment, "at least life won't be boring." The great hall of Wolfsbane kept buzzed with activity as my parents and Lady Rosalind began discussing wedding preparations. The enchanted sausage, caught up in the excitement, performed increasingly complex aerial maneuvers while playing a medley of traditional werewolf and dragon wedding songs. "The ceremony must honor both traditions," my mother insisted, her scales gleaming. "The dragon elders will expect nothing less for a descendant of Celestia the Great." Of course," Lady Rosalind agreed enthusiastically. "We'll need to incorporate the sacred moon dance and the dragon's flame ritual, though perhaps we should keep Elukar away from the fire-breathing portion." "And what about the human realm customs?" my father added, adjusting his constellation-covered robes. "After all, she is a bridge-walker now. All three worlds must be represented." Philomena floated between them, her guardian aura pulsing with authority. "As her appointed guardian, I must insist on proper magical protocol. The binding ceremony must take place during the perfect alignment of moon and stars, which happens to coincide with finals week," I muttered. "Oh, don't worry about that," Warden called from where he was examining the enchanted sausage's musical capabilities. "Professor Blackwood, or should I say Elder Flamewing, has agreed to postpone the calculus exam, though he did mutter something about setting the test papers on fire." Kyle squeezed my hand, his amber eyes twinkling. "At least the coffee shop will be well-staffed for the reception. Mother's hired 3 more interdimensional baristas." "Speaking of staff," Theron materialized excitedly, "I've been working on the seating arrangements. Ghosts on the left, werewolves in the center, dragons on the right, and humans. Well, wherever they won't get accidentally transformed or set on fire." The enchanted sausage performed a complex loop-de-loop and started playing what sounded suspiciously like "Here Comes the Bride," mixed with dragon roars and wolf howls. "And what about Lysandra?" I asked, remembering my former classmate who had started this whole adventure by pushing me off that roof. "Still serving tea with Professor Grimshaw," Lady Rosalind smirked. "Though we might invite them to the wedding, assuming they can stop whistling steam long enough to attend." My mother stepped forward, her dragon form radiating pride. "You've found your place between worlds, my dear, just as the prophecy said you would." "Prophecy?" I blinked. "What prophecy?" "Oh, did we forget to mention that part?" My father grinned sheepishly. "There might have been an ancient prediction about a quarter dragon bridge walker who would unite the realms through love and stolen breakfast meats." The enchanted sausage puffed up importantly at this revelation. Looking around at my bizarre magical family, dragon mother, star-robed father, werewolf future in-laws, ghost best man, guardian cat, and enchanted sausage, I couldn't help but laugh. This wasn't the life I'd expected when I fell through that portal, but somehow it was exactly where I belonged. Chapter 14. The full moon hung low over Wolfsbane Keep, its silvery light illuminating the ancient stone walls as we gathered in the ceremonial chamber. The enchanted sausage floated solemnly above, playing a haunting melody that echoed through the vast space. My parents, Lady Rosalind, Kyle, Theron, and Philomena, stood in a circle around me, their faces grave with concentration. "The binding magic is complex," Warden explained, his constellation-covered robes shifting like living stars. "It's not just about breaking the bonds. It's about transforming them into something new." My mother stepped forward, her dragon scales gleaming. "The blood of the dragon elders flows through your veins, my daughter. That power, combined with your bridgewalker abilities, might be enough to reshape the magical connections." "And my werewolf essence?" I asked, looking at the silvery marks that still pulsed across my scales. That's the interesting part, Lady Rosalind smiled, showing her impressive fangs. The werewolf magic has actually stabilized your transformation. Without it, you might have been torn between realms. Kyle took my hand, his amber eyes serious. We don't have to break all the bonds, he said softly. Just the ones that are holding you captive. The enchanted sausage performed a sympathetic loop and switched to a more hopeful melody. The timing must be perfect, Philomena declared, her guardian aura glowing brightly. When the moon reaches its zenith, the barriers between realms will be at their thinnest. And that's when we strike, Theron materialized, grinning. Though hopefully with less chaos than the Great Teapot incident. The scroll of your grandmother contains the key, my father added, unrolling the ancient parchment. The same magic that awakened your dragon blood can be used to reshape your magical essence. As the moonlight grew stronger, the marks on my scales began to pulse more intensely. The star-crossed pattern shifted and swirled, creating new constellations across my hybrid form. The time had come to face our greatest challenge yet, breaking the unwanted bonds while preserving the ones that mattered most. The moonlight intensified as it reached its zenith, casting an ethereal glow across the ceremonial chamber. The enchanted sausage's melody grew more powerful, weaving together threads of dragon song, wolf howls, and ancient magic. My scales glittered with starlight as the star-crossed pattern began to pulse with increasing intensity. Now, my mother commanded, her dragon form radiating power. Begin the ritual. Lady Rosalind raised her hands, channeling werewolf magic that swirled around me in silver streams. My father's constellation robes blazed with starlight as he added his power to the mix. The enchanted sausage, caught up in the moment, performed an elaborate aerial symphony that seemed to strengthen the magical currents. Remember, Orden cautioned, his hands weaving complex patterns in the air. We're not trying to break all the bonds, just reshape them. The connection between realms must remain stable. Kyle stood beside me, his amber eyes glowing with determination. Focus on what matters, he whispered. The bonds we choose to keep are stronger than those forced upon us. Philomena floated above, her guardian aura pulsing in rhythm with the magical energies. The barriers are thinning. Now is the time. I closed my eyes, feeling the different magics course through me. Dragon blood from my mother's lineage, werewolf essence from Kyle's binding, the bridgewalker powers that connected me to both realms. The star-crossed pattern on my scales began to shift and change, forming new constellations that reflected my true nature. It's working, Theron exclaimed, his ghostly form shimmering with excitement. The unwanted bonds are dissolving. The chamber filled with swirling lights as the magic reached its peak. I felt the restrictive bindings begin to fade, replaced by stronger, chosen connections. My transformation stabilized, settling into a form that truly represented who I had become. Not a monster, not a victim of circumstance, but a bridgewalker who had found her place between worlds. The enchanted sausage performed its most impressive musical flourish yet, accompanying the spectacular magical display with a triumphant melody that echoed through Wolfsbane Keep. The magical energies swirled around me like a tempest of starlight and moonbeams, the enchanted sausage's melody reaching a crescendo that seemed to shake the very foundations of Wolfsbane Keep. My hybrid form glowed with an inner light as the star-crossed pattern continued its transformation. The bonds are changing, my mother called out, her dragon form radiating power. Focus on the connections you want to keep. I thought of Kyle, of our shared adventures and stolen moments. I thought of Theron, my ghostly best friend who had guided me through this strange world. I remembered Philomena, my guardian cat who had watched over me all along. These were the bonds I wanted to preserve, chosen connections forged through love and friendship, not magical accidents or ancient prophecies. The moon's power is at its peak, Lady Rosalind announced, her werewolf magic pulsing in silver waves. Now is the moment. My father's constellation robes blazed like 1,000 stars as he channeled his power into the ritual. Remember who you are, Starlight. Not just a bridgewalker, not just a quarter dragon or a werewolf's bride, but our daughter, who found her own path between worlds. The enchanted sausage, caught up in the emotional intensity of the moment, performed its most complex musical arrangement yet. a symphony that wove together all the threads of my journey, the night I fell through the portal, the theft that started it all, the transformations, the discoveries, and the love that had grown despite everything. Suddenly I felt the restrictive bonds beginning to shatter. The magical bindings that had held me captive dissolved like morning mist, while the connections I had chosen grew stronger. My hybrid form stabilized, settling into something that felt truly mine, not a curse or an accident, but a reflection of who I had become. "It's done," Ordan declared, lowering his hands as the magical energies began to fade. "The unwanted bonds are broken, but the Bridgewalker powers remain." Kyle pulled me into his arms, his amber eyes shining. "How do you feel?" I flexed my wings, swished my tail, and felt the comfortable weight of my scales. "Like myself," I answered, smiling. "Finally, completely myself." The enchanted sausage performed a triumphant aerial dance, playing a victory march that made everyone laugh. "Well," Theron materialized, grinning, "I suppose this means we can focus on the wedding planning now, unless anyone else has any ancient prophecies or magical bindings they'd like to mention." "Or just one," my mother smiled mysteriously. "But perhaps we should save that revelation for the reception." As the magical energies settled in the ceremonial chamber of Wolfsbane Keep, a warm golden light filled the space. The enchanted sausage, exhausted from its musical performance, floated lazily above us, playing a gentle, contented melody. "There's still one matter we need to discuss," my mother said, her dragon scales catching the moonlight. "The prophecy mentioned not just breaking bonds, but creating new ones, bridges between all three realms." "Three realms?" I asked, still nestled in Kyle's arms. "I thought there were only two, the magical realm and the human world." My father's constellation robes shimmered as he smiled mysteriously. "There's the dragon realm as well, where your grandmother's people dwell. As a bridge walker and realm anchor, you have the unique ability to connect all three worlds, which is precisely why the wedding must take place during the next celestial alignment," Lady Rosalind added, her werewolf form radiating excitement. "When the moon is full, the stars are aligned, and the dragon constellations are in position." Philomena floated down, her guardian aura pulsing with approval. "It's a rare occurrence, happening only once every 100 years, perfect for a union that will strengthen the bonds between realms. And this time," Theron materialized, grinning, "we'll make sure there are no magical accidents. One great teapot incident per century is quite enough." The enchanted sausage performed a hopeful little loop, playing what sounded suspiciously like wedding bells mixed with dragon roars and wolf howls. "So," Kyle said, his amber eyes twinkling, "no pressure. We're just getting married in a ceremony that will either strengthen the bonds between three realms or potentially cause another interdimensional incident. At least we'll have good coffee at the reception." I laughed, feeling truly free for the first time since falling through that portal. My hybrid form no longer felt like a curse or a burden, but a reflection of who I was meant to be, a bridge between worlds, connected to both my dragon heritage and my werewolf future. "And don't forget," Orden added with a smile, "you still have finals week to survive before the wedding. Though perhaps," my father suggested, his robes twinkling with starlight, "we should focus on more pressing matters, like explaining to the human realm's wedding guests why the best man is a ghost and the music is being performed by an enchanted sausage." The chamber filled with laughter as we began planning the most unique wedding in the history of all three realms. The bonds that had once held me captive were broken, replaced by connections I had chosen to my family, to Kyle, to this strange and wonderful magical world that had become my home. Chapter 15. The day of the wedding dawned bright and clear, 3 moons hanging in perfect alignment over Wolfsbane Keep. The enchanted sausage floated excitedly through the corridors, practicing its wedding march while decorated in tiny flowers. Preparations for the most unique ceremony in the history of 3 realms were in full swing. In my chambers, surrounded by mirrors that reflected my hybrid form in all its glory, my mother helped me into a dress that seemed woven from starlight and moonbeams. My scales shimmed beneath the fabric, the star-crossed pattern now a beautiful constellation that told the story of my journey. "Your grandmother would be proud," my mother said, her dragon form radiating joy. the first bridge walker to unite all three realms through marriage. Philomena floated nearby, her guardian aura pulsing with approval as she supervised the arrangements. The barriers between worlds are perfectly aligned. The dragon elders have arrived through the celestial portal, the werewolf clans are gathering in the courtyard, and the human guests, she paused, whiskers twitching with amusement, are still trying to process why the best man keeps floating through walls. Speaking of Theron, I asked, where is he? Giving Kyle a pep talk, my father answered, entering the room in his finest constellation robes, though I believe they're mostly discussing coffee brewing techniques and the proper way to dodge magical fireballs. Lady Rosalind burst in, her elegant werewolf form practically vibrating with excitement. The dragon elders are being seated. The enchanted sausage has finally perfected its musical arrangement, and Professor Grimshaw has promised not to whistle steam during the ceremony. And Lysandra? I couldn't help but ask about my former rival who had inadvertently started this whole adventure by pushing me off that roof. Still serving tea? Lady Rosalind smirked, though she did send a lovely card apologizing for the attempted murder. Quite thoughtful, really. The enchanted sausage poked its head through the doorway, playing a few urgent notes to signal it was time. My father offered his arm, his robes twinkling like the night sky. Ready to make magical history, Starlight? Looking at my reflection one last time, the quarter-dragon bridge walker bride, bound to a werewolf barista through love and stolen breakfast meats, I couldn't help but smile. This wasn't the life I'd expected when I fell through that portal, but it was exactly where I belonged. Ready, I answered, my dragon wolf tail swishing with anticipation, though perhaps we should warn the human guests about the traditional werewolf howling ceremony. The great hall of Wolfsbane Keep had been transformed into a magnificent space where all three realms converged. Crystal chandeliers floated beneath the enchanted ceiling, which reflected the three perfectly aligned moons. Dragon elders perched regally in their designated section, their scales gleaming like precious gems. The werewolf clans filled the center, their formal attire a striking contrast to their wild nature. And the human guests, still wide-eyed with wonder, occupied the safest seats near the exits. The enchanted sausage floated above the gathering, conducting an invisible orchestra that played a beautiful blend of dragon songs, werewolf howls, and traditional wedding music. Theron, resplendent in his ghostly best man attire, hovered beside Kyle at the altar, occasionally passing through nervous guests just to keep things interesting. Remember, my father whispered as we prepared to make our entrance, this isn't just a wedding. It's the fulfillment of an ancient prophecy, though perhaps the part about the stolen breakfast meat was a bit unexpected. Lady Rosalind appeared, practically glowing with pride. Everything is ready. The dragon elders have blessed the ceremonial circles. The werewolf clans are properly restrained from spontaneous howling. And Professor Grimshaw has been fitted with a special anti-steam whistle. My mother joined us, her dragon form radiating joy. The stars are perfectly aligned, my dear. Are you ready to make magical history? I looked down at my dress, where the star-crossed pattern shimmered beneath the fabric, telling the story of my journey from that fateful rooftop fall to this moment. My hybrid form no longer felt like a curse, but a gift, a bridge between worlds, just as I had become a bridge between hearts. One last thing, Philomena floated down, her guardian aura pulsing with authority. Remember the proper protocol for the three-realm binding ceremony. Dragon fire first, then werewolf howling, followed by the human exchange of rings. And please, she added with a twitch of her whiskers, try to keep Ilukar away from any magical artifacts. The enchanted sausage performed a dramatic flourish, signaling the start of the ceremony. As the doors to the great hall opened, I caught sight of Kyle waiting at the altar, his amber eyes shining with love. This wasn't the life either of us had expected, but somehow it was perfectly right. The ceremony began as the three moons reached their perfect alignment, casting an ethereal glow through the enchanted windows of Wolfsbane Keep. The enchanted sausage, now adorned with tiny flowers, conducted its masterpiece, a beautiful symphony that wove together all three realms' traditional music. I walked down the aisle on my father's arm, his constellation robes twinkling in harmony with my star-crossed pattern. The dragon elders breathed gentle flames of blessing, creating shimmering arcs of rainbow fire above our heads. The werewolf clans managed to contain their howling to a dignified minimum, though Ilukar still managed to accidentally set his program on fire. Kyle waited at the altar, his amber eyes shining with love and wonder. Theron floated beside him, maintaining his corporeal form with impressive focus, though he did accidentally pass through a few guests when particularly moved by the music. Philomena sat regally on a cushion, her guardian aura pulsing in rhythm with the three moons' light. "Dearly beloved," Lady Rosalind began, her werewolf form radiating authority, "we are gathered here today to witness a union that transcends not just families but realms themselves. A union prophesied in ancient scrolls, though perhaps not quite in the way we expected." She glanced meaningfully at the enchanted sausage, which performed a proud little twirl. My mother stepped forward, her dragon scales gleaming, as she initiated the dragon's blessing. "By the ancient power of the dragon elders, we bless this union with eternal flame." She breathed a gentle arc of silver fire that encircled Kyle and me, binding our souls in dragon magic. The werewolf clans joined their voices in the traditional moon song, their harmonious howls echoing through the great hall. The human guests, after their initial shock, seemed to find it quite moving, though Professor Grimshaw did let out a small whistle of steam. "Through 3 realms and countless adventures," Kyle said, taking my hands in his. "You've stolen not just my sausage, but my heart." The enchanted sausage performed a particularly emotional musical flourish at this point. "And you," I replied, my dragon wolf tail swishing with joy, "gave me a home between worlds where I finally found myself." As the 3 realms ceremony reached its climax, the enchanted sausage performed its grandest symphony yet, weaving together music from all worlds. The magical energies swirled around us, creating a spectacular display of light and color that left even the dragon elders speechless. "By the power of all 3 realms," Lady Rosalind proclaimed, her voice carrying across the great hall, "I now pronounce you bound in magic, love, and breakfast meat-related mischief." The moment Kyle and I kissed, the star-crossed pattern on my scales blazed with brilliant light, creating constellations that danced across the enchanted ceiling. The dragon elders breathed streams of rainbow fire that formed intricate patterns in the air, while the werewolf clans raised their voices in a harmonious howl that made the crystal chandeliers vibrate. Well, Theron materialized beside us, grinning. "I suppose this makes up for the great teapot incident after all." My parents stepped forward, both radiating pride. My mother's dragon form glowed with ancient power, while my father's constellation robes twinkled like living stars. "The prophecy is fulfilled," they said in unison. "The Bridgewalker has united the realms through love." The enchanted sausage, overcome with emotion, performed a series of aerial pirouettes while playing what sounded suspiciously like "Here Comes the Bride," mixed with dragon roars and wolf howls. "And now," Lady Rosalind announced with a mischievous glint in her eye, "we celebrate with the finest interdimensional coffee, served by our expert barista staff." As the reception began, I looked around at my strange, wonderful family: dragon mother, star-robed father, werewolf in-laws, ghost best man, guardian cat, and, of course, my beloved werewolf husband. The human guests were gradually warming up to the idea of ghostly waiters and floating musical sausages, while Professor Grimshaw managed to keep his steam whistling to a minimum. "So," Kyle whispered, pulling me close, "ready for our next adventure?" I smiled, my dragon wolf tail swishing contentedly, "as long as it involves less roof falling and sausage stealing." "No promises," he grinned. "After all, we still have to explain to your human world colleagues why their new professors keep turning into werewolves during faculty meetings." The enchanted sausage floated above us, playing a final triumphant note that echoed through all 3 realms, marking the beginning of our new life together. A life filled with magic, love, and just the right amount of chaos.